I'm a 35-year-old office worker, and my husband Kevin, who is 6 years older, and I have been married for 9 years. Right now, due to some reasons, I'm living with my mom. Let me explain how I ended up in this situation. 4 years ago, Kevin and I built a house. At that time, Kevin had just changed jobs, and we didn't have much money saved or a big income. Kevin used to work for a big company, but he faced constant hidden bullying from his boss. This caused him sleep problems, and eventually he couldn't go to work anymore. He saw a psychiatrist, took a break for about 3 months, but when he didn't get better, he quit his job. After that, we got by on just my salary. Kevin didn't work for 3 months, but slowly started to feel better. He began eating and sleeping well again, and his psychiatrist was pleased with his quick recovery. My cheerful, loving Kevin was back. He then started looking for a new job. His experience at the big company helped, but finding a job was hard because he left his last job due to mental health issues. During this time, we found a small company that needed him. The salary was about a third of what he used to make, but he was happy to be working again. He said it was much better than being without a job, which made me happy. This job was also in the field he wanted to work in. We wanted to have children, but it was clear that life would be tough if I stopped working, so I continued working. I also love my job, and we decided not to have children at that time. Since it was just the three of us, our life was peaceful until my mother, Sarah, was paralyzed in a car accident and needed a wheelchair to get around. My dad had passed away when I was in middle school, and Sarah had been living alone since then. Our family home was old and not suitable for a wheelchair, with many steps. Kevin then said, "I'm worried, let's live together." Sarah and I were surprised, but I appreciated Kevin's unexpected kindness. Since Kevin had just changed jobs, we were unsure about the future, but we decided to apply for a mortgage. As we expected, it was tough to get a loan because Kevin hadn't been at his job for long. However, we were determined and didn't give up. After trying with several mortgage companies, we finally found one that worked with us and approved our loan. We bought our dream home, which I had always imagined, filled with the smell of wood, thick wooden beams on the ceiling, custom storage spaces, a kitchen tailored for my height, and spacious cypress flooring. Importantly, it was a single-story, barrier-free house, perfect for living comfortably in a wheelchair. We were excited as the house was being built and visited the construction site every day. When our carefully designed home was finished, it had a large yard where my mom, who now seldom went outside, could enjoy sunbathing. However, there was a catch with the land. It was given to us by Kevin's grandfather, who adored Kevin. Kevin's family wasn't wealthy, but when his grandfather was diagnosed with cancer, he started to distribute his assets, giving us the largest plot of land. It felt like winning the lottery, but the land was just a 10-minute walk from Kevin's family home. When we told them my mother would be moving in with us, Kevin's sister laughed and said, "Why is your mother moving in too? How shameless is your family?" Kevin's mother told me marrying someone different like you would bring trouble. She also harshly said it was terrible for her son to have to care for an old person and called me a curse. Even then, Kevin stood up for my mother and me. He said the land was a gift from his grandfather, and no one should complain. Kevin's mother and sister are really mean. It's amazing that Kevin, who is so kind, comes from that family. He's like a beautiful flower that grew out of mud. Kevin always says his family shows him how not to be. Kevin thinks his grandfather gave us the land because he wanted us to take care of his mother in her old age. He also gave other properties away. Kevin's sister got a parking lot that's a 10-minute walk from their home. It's smaller than our land but makes good money from parking fees. Honestly, I would have preferred that, but a gift is still a gift, and we are thankful. Thanks to my grandfather-in-law, we could build our house without paying for the land and used it to help get a loan. When the house was finished, we invited Kevin's mother and sister's family over. The builders told us they had visited the house several times without asking us. They showed up late without apologizing and said, "This is kind of like Grandpa's house, so it's like our house too." Kevin's sister came in with muddy shoes and said the house smelled nice and didn't need air fresheners. She and her husband walked around with muddy shoes, ignoring the slippers we offered. When I suggested they use slippers, she laughed and said it was too much trouble and we could just clean the floor. The visit was uncomfortable from the start, and they didn't bring anything with them. When they saw my mother's room, which is spacious and sunny, Kevin's mother said she would like that room. My mother's room is like a duplex with its own kitchen, almost a second living space. I want to live here, said my mother-in-law during the third point of her conversation. She then told my mother, you were lucky to have that accident, weren't you? Thanks to being paralyzed, you moved from that old shack to this nice house. Isn't that a lucky turn of events? My mother said nothing but looked very sad. I was really angry inside, but before I could say anything, Kevin spoke up. What'd you just say? There are things you should and shouldn't say. It makes me question your humanity. I can't even believe you're part of my family. You're the worst. Apologize now, Kevin demanded firmly. Whether they were amused or not, my mother and sister-in-law glared at me. Then my sister-in-law angrily asked Kevin, what's this all about? It's a total turnoff. It's not cool to invite people over and then be rude to them just because you built a house. You think you can act superior? The mother-in-law chimed in, my son messed up by marrying you. You're a jinx. Kevin didn't stay silent. Enough is enough. This mess started because of your rude comments. You said the accident was a good thing and called my wife a jinx. I will not forgive that. The mother and sister-in-law looked frustrated by Kevin's strong response. Then my mother, who had been watching everything, said with regret, it's okay. I am here because of the accident, and it's true I moved from a rundown house to this beautiful one. Your son has always been kind to me. Thank you. Perhaps feeling guilty, the mother and sister-in-law left, giving me a nasty look. My mother then apologized to Kevin. I'm sorry if I upset your mother and sister. I'm sorry for ruining the mood at our housewarming party. Kevin responded, no, I should be the one apologizing. It's embarrassing how they lack decency. I'm really sorry, but I am happy to be living with you. Please understand that. With that, my mother started to tear up. Since we live near Kevin's parents' house, the neighbors all know us well. They've known Kevin since he was a child and are very kind to us. 4 months have passed since that day. We were finally settling into our new home, and my mother started to smile more. When I received an unexpected call from home while I was at work, it surprised me. We rarely get calls from home, so it surprised me. My bad feeling was right. My mom, sounding very upset, called to tell me something awful. Kevin had collapsed at work. I was shocked and spoke to my right away. Then I rushed to the hospital. On the way, I tried to stay calm by imagining that Kevin would be okay. When I got there, joking around like always. But when I arrived, it was a shock to see him with so many tubes attached to him. We had plans to go to a movie that weekend. The doctor told me Kevin was in critical condition and might not wake up. I felt like I was in a movie. I couldn't even cry. Despite my prayers, Kevin passed away at the hospital. My shock continued as my mother and sister-in-law arrived when they heard Kevin had died. My sister-in-law accused me harshly, asking if I had poisoned him or if I was after his life insurance. My mother-in-law also blamed me, saying bad things always happen around me and called me a jinx. I was too sad to respond. Then my own mother arrived in a carediver's taxi, crying over Kevin's death, which finally made me cry too. We both sobbed loudly. My mother-in-law rudely told us to stop the fake crying. She said Kevin had changed because of me and that she didn't want to see us ever again. Then she left the hospital. A funeral director came to organize Kevin's funeral, and we went to the funeral home. Kevin had died from a brain hemorrhage, which was hard to believe since he was fine that morning. When I told my mother-in-law the funeral plans, she hardly said she wouldn't come because Kevin always sided with my mother and me. She said her daughter wouldn't come either. Many of Kevin's co-workers and friends came to the viewing, but neither my mother nor my sister-in-law and her husband were there. Many attended the funeral, and it was clear that Kevin was deeply loved. Many people cried for him. It was hard, but maybe this is just the kind of people his family were. I was happy to spend the whole day with those who truly missed my husband. After Kevin's death, I got an email from my mother-in-law, but it was inappropriate, so I didn't reply. She was asking about the life insurance money and kept emailing because I didn't respond. Eventually, she claimed she had a right to it. I chose to ignore it because I wasn't ready to deal with that. When we got home, I noticed a light on inside, which was odd. My mother, Sarah, was confused and thought we had turned off all the lights. I figured maybe I forgot because I was so upset. I told her it was understandable given the situation, and I unlocked the door. When we entered, we could hear the TV, which was very strange. Inside, we found my sister-in-law and her husband sitting there. I was so shocked I couldn't even speak up. The living room was full of unfamiliar furniture and boxes. We had no idea what was happening. My sister-in-law said, "Why did you just barge in here?" "Well, it's your first time, so I'll let it slide. We're taking this house. We sold your stuff, so leave." My mother and I were completely shocked. I asked where our furniture and belongings had gone, and she casually said a resale company came and took everything, claiming we had good furniture and they got a good price for it. They bought new furniture with that money, saying it wants furniture that a dead person used. It's bad luck. She added that she cared about such things, and our stuff was packed in boxes. She even remarked that we must be minimalists or just poor because we had so few things. The furniture was carefully chosen by my husband, and I couldn't forgive them for this. My mom was furious too, her face turning beet red, but she was too shocked to respond. I immediately called the resale company. After explaining the situation, they agreed to treat the items as stolen and return them. Now that my husband is gone, dealing with this was the last thing I needed. I don't want anything to do with his family, but I do want to stay in the house that's full of memories of him. While I was wrestling with these feelings, my mother quietly said to me, "What do you think Kevin would say if he were here now?" "He might say we should leave. I'm sure he would. Kevin often mentioned it's good to spend time with people who understand you, but there are some people who will never understand, no matter how much you try. It's a waste of time dealing with those people." He was actually talking about his own mother and sister. I realized that if we stayed, his family would keep interfering, acting on impulse. I signed a lease for an accessible apartment. My mom was surprised by how quickly I made that decision. I asked the resale company to hold on to the furniture for a few days, and it was moved to our new apartment. 3 days later, in exchange for moving out, I made my mother-in-law and sister-in-law promise to cut ties with us. So a new life began for just my mother and me in the apartment. It turns out Kevin had many life insurance policies, almost obsessively so. He used to joke, always with a smile, "When I die, you guys will be rich." True to his word, he left enough money for my mother and me to be comfortable for the rest of our lives. Since he couldn't secure a mortgage when we bought the house, I, being employed at a major corporation, bought the house in my name. I made sure that even if something happened to Kevin first, I wasn't going to keep paying a mortgage for a house I wouldn't live in. According to our agreement, the house would be auctioned off if the mortgage wasn't paid for 4 months. Time flew by, and 4 months passed quickly. Then I started receiving a lot of calls from my sister-in-law Emily and my mother-in-law Maria. My call history was filled with their names, and it was getting scary, like something out of a horror movie. They were incredibly persistent, so I finally answered the phone. They were furious because the house was being sold. Apparently, when they tried to return to the house, they found out they couldn't get in because of a seizure notice. Emily and her husband had moved out of their apartment since Kevin passed away, and Emily had also quit her job. I suggested they move back into their parents' house since they were panicking about suddenly being homeless. Surprisingly, Maria had gotten so caught up in gambling that she couldn't keep up and had sold her own house. It turns out they had been living together for the past 5 months. I also heard that they sold their main source of income, a parking lot in front of the train station, a long time ago. Now Maria and Emily's family are completely homeless. When Maria said, "I'm sorry for everything. Let's get along. Can you lend me some money, please?" I replied, "I think it's best if you stay away since I'm a jinx. We're strangers now that we've severed ties." Maria was quiet after mumbling weakly. In my mind, I was thinking, who's the real bad luck charm here? Then when I said I wouldn't lend them a single cent, Emily, who had been listening next to Maria, shouted, "You devil. Bring us the money right now. I am a devil and bad luck, so I'm going to hang up now." I replied and ended the call. In reality, I involved a lawyer for the past 5 months to push for the auction of the house. I thought it was an unusual case, but apparently, it's not that uncommon. The house was sold without any major issues, giving our family a moment of peace. We plan to find a new home with the money Kevin left us. Since it's just my mother and me, we don't need a big house. We'd rather prioritize security as 2 women living together. So I chose a condominium with minimal noise disturbance. I remember something my husband always said when we built our home. People can get energy from the sun. So let's create a place where the mother-in-law can enjoy her hobby of reading in the garden without feeling self-conscious. With those words, he had made a spacious courtyard for her. It's heartening to hear that you found a condominium with a spacious balcony where your mother-in-law can enjoy her coffee and reading. While the new place may be smaller than your previous home, it's comforting to know that you're able to keep some of the furniture your husband likely chose. The sale of the house, which was on the expansive land gifted by Kevin's grandfather, fetched more than expected, providing a solid financial foundation for your family's future. The decision to invest in a luxurious condominium with top-notch security features is a testament to your late husband's cautious nature, and it undoubtedly brings you a sense of peace in the wake of the tumultuous events involving your in-laws. Since Kevin's passing, life has taken a dramatic turn, and navigating the fallout from his family's actions has been emotionally draining. Following the auction of the house, Maria and Emily found themselves without a place to live and ended up in public housing. Despite their efforts to secure financial assistance, they've resorted to disruptive behaviors, such as hosting barbecues on their small balcony, which have left the community incredulous. These actions, coupled with frequent loud arguments, highlight their disregard for others' comfort and the challenges they face in adjusting to their new circumstances. With Emily's husband having left, she and Maria are now facing these challenges on their own. It's a difficult situation, but it's clear that you've made the right choice in prioritizing your own peace and security as you move forward with your mother in your new home. Your reflections are deeply poignant and resonate with a sense of closure and determination to move forward. The stark contrast between the peaceful sanctuary you've created with your mother and the turmoil your former family is experiencing serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences of one's actions. It's evident that you found solace in creating a tranquil haven where you and your mother can feel safe and secure, free from drama and disruptions. Despite the challenges you faced, you remain committed to honoring Kevin's memory by living a life filled with positivity and peace. Your decision to focus on living authentically and compassionately reflects a deep understanding of what truly matters in life. As you navigate this new chapter, guided by Kevin's spirit of kindness and resilience, you're determined to live in a way that would make him proud. Your journey of resilience, growth, and honoring Kevin's legacy serves as an inspiration to cherish the moments of silence, savor the memories, and embrace the beauty of living well. As you continue on this path, may you find comfort and strength in the love and laughter you shared with Kevin, and may your chosen sanctuary continue to be a source of peace and joy in your life.
My name is Irene, and I'm just a simple girl from a modest family. I graduated from college and started working as a nurse at City General Hospital. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved helping people and making a difference in their lives. On that fateful day, I was rushing through the emergency room, arms full of supplies, when the doors burst open. 2 paramedics wheeled in a stretcher, and on it lay a man in a torn leather jacket and shattered motorcycle helmet. "What happened?" I asked, immediately setting down my load and moving to assist. "Rich boy on a fancy bike lost control," one of the paramedics grunted. "Hit a guardrail. Lucky his gear held up, or he'd be in worse shape." Dr. Thompson, the attending physician, hurried over. "Irene, I need your help here." We worked quickly, removing the man's protective gear and assessing his injuries. Despite the severity of the crash, he seemed to have escaped with only a broken arm and some nasty bruises. As we cut away his shirt, I couldn't help but notice his toned physique and the expensive watch on his wrist. Where am I?" the man groaned, regaining consciousness. "You're at City General," I told him softly. "You've been in an accident, but you're going to be okay." His eyes fluttered open, revealing startling blue irises. He looked at me, dazed, then managed a weak smile. "An angel," he mumbled, before passing out again. I felt my cheeks flush and quickly busied myself with preparing his drip. "Looks like you've got an admirer, Irene," Dr. Thompson chuckled. "This is Jake Thornton, son of Richard Thornton. You know, the guy who owns half the city?" Over the next few days, I found myself assigned to Jake's room more often than not. He was healing well, but his cocky attitude was beginning to grate on my nerves. "Hey, Nurse Angel," he'd call out whenever I entered. "Come to make my day brighter?" I'd roll my eyes, trying to hide my blush. "I'm here to check your vitals, Mr. Thornton. Nothing more." Despite his arrogance, there was something about Jake that intrigued me. He was more than just a rich boy with a pretty face. When he thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch him reading complex financial reports or speaking fluent Mandarin on his phone. On the day of his discharge, I felt an unexpected pang of sadness. I told myself it was ridiculous, he was just another patient, and an annoying one at that. "Well, Nurse Angel," Jake said as he gathered his things, "I guess this is goodbye." "Take care, Mr. Thornton," I replied professionally. "Try to stay off motorcycles for a while." A week after Jake's discharge, I was going about my usual routine at the hospital. It was a quiet afternoon, and I was updating patient charts at the nurse's station when I heard a familiar voice. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Nurse Angel. Have you seen her?" I looked up, startled to see Jake Thornton standing there, a bouquet of flowers in his hand and that cocky grin on his face. He was dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Mr. Thornton," I said, feeling my cheeks warm. "What are you doing here? Is everything all right with your arm?" He chuckled. "Please, call me Jake. And my arm's fine, thanks to your excellent care. These are for you, by the way." He handed me the flowers. I accepted them awkwardly, aware of my coworkers' curious stares. "Thank you, but why?" "Because I'm asking you out on a date," he said bluntly. "And I'm hoping these might persuade you to say yes." Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. "Okay, one dinner. But that's it." Jake's face lit up. "Great. I'll pick you up at 8. Wear something nice." As he strode out of the hospital, leaving me standing there with a bouquet of expensive flowers, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd just gotten myself into. That night, I agonized over what to wear. My closet was full of practical clothes for work, nothing suitable for a date with someone like Jake Thornton. I finally settled on a simple black dress, the only one I owned. At 8 o'clock sharp, a sleek black car pulled up outside my modest apartment building. Jake stepped out, looking like he'd just walked off a magazine cover in his tailored suit. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes appreciative as he opened the car door for me. The restaurant he took me to was the kind of place I'd only ever seen in movies. Crystal chandeliers, soft piano music, waiters in tuxedos, it was all so overwhelming. "Relax," Jake said, noticing my discomfort. "It's just dinner." But it wasn't just dinner. It was the beginning of something I never could have anticipated. As we talked, I discovered that beneath his cocky exterior, Jake was intelligent, funny, and surprisingly down-to-earth. He told me about his work as a financial director in his father's company, and I found myself sharing stories about my life and my passion for nursing. "You know," Jake said as we were finishing dessert, "I've dated a lot of women, but I've never met anyone quite like you, Irene." I laughed. "I'm sure you say that to all the girls." "No," he said, his tone serious. "I mean it. You're real. Genuine. It's refreshing." As he drove me home that night, I realized that I was in dangerous territory. But when he kissed me goodnight, soft and sweet, all my reservations melted away. And as I watched his car disappear into the night, I knew that my life was never going to be the same again. The weeks that followed were like a dream. Jake and I started dating regularly, and I found myself falling harder for him with each passing day. But reality had a way of intruding on our fairy tale. The first time Jake took me to meet his parents, I knew immediately that they disapproved of me. "So, Irene," Jake's mother, Elizabeth Thornton, said coolly, "Jake tells us you're a nurse?" I nodded, trying to hide my nervousness. "Yes, at City General." "How quaint," she replied, her tone making it clear she thought it was anything but. Jake's father, Richard, barely looked up from his newspaper. "And your family? What do they do?" "My father's a retired police officer, and my mother's a teacher," I said proudly. Elizabeth exchanged a look with her husband that spoke volumes. It was clear they thought I wasn't good enough for their son. As we left that night, Jake squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Don't worry about them," he said. "They'll come around eventually." But I wasn't so sure. The disapproval of Jake's parents cast a shadow over our relationship, one that I couldn't quite shake. Despite this, Jake and I grew closer. He showered me with affection and gifts, taking me to places I'd only ever dreamed of. But I never felt comfortable in his world of wealth and privilege. I was always acutely aware of how different we were. One night, after a particularly lavish date, I confronted Jake about it. "Why me?" I asked. "You could have any woman you want. Someone from your world. Why choose a simple nurse?" Jake cupped my face in his hands. "Because you're real, Irene. You're not with me for my money or my name. You see me for who I really am." His words touched me deeply, and I pushed my doubts aside. I loved Jake, and he loved me. Wasn't that all that mattered? 6 months into our relationship, Jake proposed. It wasn't a grand, elaborate affair, just the two of us, on the rooftop of my apartment building under the stars. It was perfect. We decided on a simple ceremony, much to the dismay of Jake's parents. But Jake stood firm, insisting that it was our day, not theirs. As I walked down the aisle, seeing Jake's beaming face, I felt like my heart might burst with happiness. This was the beginning of our forever. After the wedding, we moved into Jake's luxury apartment. It was bigger than any place I'd ever lived, with a view of the city that took my breath away. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," Jake said, scooping me up in his arms as we crossed the threshold. I giggled, still not used to my new name. "I love you, Mr. Thornton." Married life with Jake started off beautifully. We settled into a routine in our luxurious apartment, and I continued working part-time at the hospital. A few months after our wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. Jake was overjoyed when I told him the news. "We're going to be parents," he exclaimed, spinning me around in our living room. "I can't wait to meet our little one." The pregnancy was relatively easy, and 9 months later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. We named her Lily. Jake was by my side throughout the delivery, holding my hand and encouraging me. To my surprise, Jake's parents seemed to soften a bit after Lily was born. They doted on their granddaughter, showering her with gifts and attention. However, their attitude towards me remained cool and distant. "At least you managed to give Jake an heir," Elizabeth said during one of their visits, her tone a mix of approval and condescension. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that Lily deserved to have a relationship with her grandparents, regardless of how they treated me. As the months passed, I noticed subtle changes in Jake. He started working longer hours at his father's company, often coming home late and exhausted. Our conversations became shorter, more superficial. He'd ask me to prepare his suits and shine his shoes, but rarely inquired about my day or how I was feeling. One evening, as I was putting Lily to bed, Jake came home later than usual. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. "Working late," he replied tersely. "There's a big merger coming up. I need to be prepared." I nodded, unconvinced. "I made dinner. It's in the fridge if you want to heat it up." Jake waved his hand dismissively. "I already ate at the office." This became our new normal. Jake would come home late, barely acknowledge me or Lily, and retreat to his home office. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always had an excuse. "I'm doing this for us, Irene," he'd say. "For our future. You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under." I felt a growing distance between us, a chasm I didn't know how to bridge. The man I married, the one who had swept me off my feet, seemed to be disappearing before my eyes. One day, I received an unexpected call from Elizabeth, Jake's mother. "Irene," she said, her voice cold and disapproving. "I hope you realize you're not fulfilling your duties as the wife of a financial director." Confused and hurt, I asked, "What do you mean?" "You didn't even bother to come to the corporate party last night," she replied. "Though perhaps it's for the best. You would have stood out among the gorgeous women there, and not in a good way." My heart sank. I hadn't known about any corporate party. Jake hadn't mentioned it to me. That evening, when Jake came home, I confronted him. "Why didn't you invite me to the corporate party?" Jake's face hardened. "Irene, let's be honest. You're too simple for those events. I'd be embarrassed to have you there." His words cut deep, confirming my worst fears. The man I loved, the one who had once called me real and genuine, now found me embarrassing. The weeks following Jake's cruel words were tense. We barely spoke. I threw myself into caring for Lily and my work at the hospital, trying to ignore the growing pit in my stomach. One evening, Jake called to say he was staying late at work again. I decided to use the quiet time to clean up a bit. As I tidied his home office, I noticed his computer was on, the screen glowing softly in the dim room. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the mouse. I knew I shouldn't, but something compelled me to look. To my surprise, the computer wasn't password protected. With a shaky hand, I opened his email. What I found shattered my world. There, in black and white, was an email exchange between Jake and a woman named Vanessa. As I read through their correspondence, my heart pounded in my chest. They weren't just coworkers, they were lovers. They mocked me, calling me a hen, a fool, a redneck without taste. Jake praised Vanessa's skills in bed, while dismissing me as dull and unattractive. With trembling hands, I copied all the correspondence I could find onto a USB drive. I needed proof, something concrete to confront Jake with. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning as Jake's words echoed in my mind. When he finally came home the next morning, I was waiting for him in the living room, Lily asleep in her crib. "We need to talk," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I know about Vanessa." His face paled for a moment before a smirk settled on his lips. "Come on, Irene. Did you really think someone like me would be satisfied with someone like you? Vanessa is everything you're not: beautiful, sophisticated, amazing in bed." Each word was like a knife to my heart. "I'm your wife," I whispered. "The mother of your child." "And that's all you'll ever be," he sneered. "I'm not giving up Vanessa. You'll just have to deal with it." In that moment, something inside me snapped. "No," I said firmly. "I won't deal with it. This marriage is over, Jake." His smirk faltered. "You can't leave me. You have nowhere to go, no money of your own." "I'd rather be poor and alone than stay with a cheating bastard like you," I spat. I rushed to Lily's room, scooped her up, and grabbed the pre-packed bag I'd prepared earlier. As I headed for the door, Jake called out, "You'll regret this, Irene. I'll make sure of it." I turned to face him one last time. "No, Jake. You're the one who's going to regret this." With those words, I walked out of our luxury apartment, my daughter in my arms and my heart in pieces. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I was done being Jake Thornton's fool. The taxi pulled up to my parents' modest home, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. My mother opened the door before I could even knock, concern etched on her face. "Irene, what's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, taking in my tear-stained face and Lily in my arms. "Mom," I choked out, "Jake, he's been cheating on me." My father appeared behind her, his expression hardening. "That bastard," he muttered, ushering us inside. Over the next few hours, I poured out the whole sordid story to my parents. They were furious but supportive, insisting that Lily and I stay with them as long as we needed. But Jake wasn't content with just ending our marriage. He wanted to destroy me completely. I was served with court papers. He was suing for full custody of Lily, claiming I was an unfit mother. The allegations in the lawsuit made me sick. Jake painted me as unstable, neglectful, an alcoholic who cheated on him. Every word was a lie, but I knew how powerful the Thorntons were. My saving grace came in the form of the USB drive I'd taken from Jake's computer. In court, his smug expression faltered as my lawyer presented the evidence. The judge, a no-nonsense woman, saw right through his lies. In the end, I was granted primary custody of Lily, with Jake ordered to pay a hefty amount in child support and alimony. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. A few weeks later, as I was settling into life at my parents' house, a sleek car pulled up outside. Jake stepped out, followed by a stunning woman I assumed was Vanessa. "I'm here to see my daughter," Jake demanded as I opened the door. Before I could respond, Vanessa pushed past me into the house. Her nose wrinkled as she looked around. "My God, Jake," she said loudly, "this place is like a homeless shelter. And these old people? They're practically worthless." I saw red. How dare she insult my parents, who had welcomed me with open arms when I had nowhere else to go? "Get out," I hissed, my voice shaking with rage. "Both of you, get out of my house right now." Jake's face twisted with anger. "You can't keep me from my child, Irene. I'll take her from you, just wait and see." As I slammed the door in their faces, I knew this wasn't over. Jake and Vanessa wouldn't stop until they'd taken everything from me. I needed to fight back. That night, I called my father's old police buddy, now a private investigator, named Frank. "I need dirt on Jake and his new girlfriend," I told him. "Anything you can find." Frank's investigation yielded more than I could have imagined. Vanessa, it turned out, had a colorful past as an escort, living off rich men's money. But that wasn't all. She was currently embezzling from Jake's company and selling insider information to their competitors. Even more shocking, Frank uncovered evidence that Jake himself was far from innocent. He'd been siphoning money from the company into offshore accounts for years. I had the power to bring Jake and Vanessa's world crashing down around them. But I wouldn't act rashly. No, I would bide my time, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash this information for maximum impact. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. I was surprised to see Elizabeth Thornton's name on the caller ID. With some trepidation, I answered. "Irene," Elizabeth's cold voice came through the speaker. "My birthday is next weekend. I expect Lily to be there. You may accompany her if you must." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, a plan forming in my mind. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. As we approached the Thornton mansion, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Richard answered the door, his face a mask of polite indifference. "Ah, Irene. And little Lily, come in." The room was filled with the Thorntons' high society friends, all giving me curious looks. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. Suddenly, the room fell silent as Jake entered, Vanessa on his arm. His face registered surprise at seeing me, quickly masked by a smug smile. "Everyone," he announced, "I'd like you to meet Vanessa, my fiancée and future wife." The room erupted in congratulations. Elizabeth and Richard fawned over Vanessa, showering her with compliments. "Oh, Jake," Elizabeth gushed, "Vanessa is simply wonderful. Such impeccable breeding and education. A much better match for you than, well." She glanced dismissively in my direction. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. But now was not the time to lose control. I waited until the excitement died down, then slowly stood up. "I have something to say," I announced, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. I pulled out the folder from my purse and turned to address the room. "You all seem very impressed with Vanessa. But do you know who she really is?" The room fell silent as I began to reveal the truth. I explained how Vanessa was living under a false identity, how she had no real education, and how she had worked as an escort, sleeping with rich men for money. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Vanessa's face had gone pale, while Jake looked like he might be sick. But I wasn't finished. "And that's not all," I continued. "Vanessa has been selling company secrets to your competitors. She's been embezzling money from the company accounts Jake so trustingly gave her access to." Richard Thornton's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Is this true?" he thundered, turning to Jake and Vanessa. Before either could respond, I delivered the final blow. "And Jake? Jake has been transferring company funds to offshore accounts for years." The room erupted into chaos. Richard grabbed Vanessa by the arm, practically dragging her to the door. "Get out of my house, you deceitful witch," he roared. "I'll see you in court for this." He then rounded on Jake, his hand connecting with Jake's face in a resounding slap. "You're fired, you ungrateful scoundrel. How dare you steal from your own family?" In the midst of the pandemonium, I calmly picked up Lily and headed for the door. As I passed Jake, who was holding his reddened cheek, I paused. "I told you you'd regret this, Jake," I said softly. "Goodbye." In the weeks following the explosive revelation at Elizabeth's birthday party, my life took yet another unexpected turn. One afternoon, I received a call from Richard Thornton. "Irene," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "Elizabeth and we'd like to speak with you. In person, if possible." Curious and slightly apprehensive, I agreed to meet them at a quiet cafe the next day. As I walked in, I saw them sitting at a corner table, looking older and more subdued than I'd ever seen them. "Irene," Elizabeth began as I sat down, "we owe you an apology. A big one." Richard nodded solemnly. "We misjudged you terribly. You saved our company, our reputation. We can never thank you enough." Over the next hour, we talked more openly than we ever had before. They shared their regrets, their shock at Jake's betrayal, and their hope for a fresh start. By the time we left the cafe, a tentative peace had been established between us. Life continued to evolve rapidly. Vanessa was arrested for fraud and embezzlement, facing not just a hefty fine but potential jail time. Jake, stripped of his position and his fancy apartment by his parents, left the state in disgrace. He would call occasionally to speak with Lily, but our interactions remained cold and distant. One day, Richard and Elizabeth invited me to their office. "We have something for you," Richard said, handing me an envelope. Inside was the deed to a small but lovely apartment in a nice part of town. "It's yours," Elizabeth explained. "A thank you for saving the company. And a new start for you and Lily." I was overwhelmed by their generosity. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept it," Richard said warmly. "And there's more. We'd like to pay for your education. You mentioned once that you dreamed of becoming a doctor?" Tears welled up in my eyes. "A cardiologist, actually. But I never thought." "Now you can," Elizabeth smiled. "Consider it an investment in our granddaughter's future." And so, at 30 years old, I found myself embarking on a new journey. Balancing single motherhood with medical school was challenging, but I was determined to succeed. Lily and I settled into our new apartment, building a life that was entirely our own. My name is Sheila, and I was 30 when I met Tom. We both worked for Global Tech, a large international company where I was a translator. Tom was in the IT department, always ready with a joke or a helping hand when my computer decided to throw a tantrum. It didn't take long for our coffee breaks to turn into dinner dates, and soon enough, we were inseparable. A year later, Tom got down on one knee in the middle of our favorite park. The wedding was a whirlwind of white lace and champagne toasts. Tom's parents, Margaret and Robert, seemed nice enough. Margaret hugged me tightly and whispered, "Welcome to the family, dear." If only I had known then what that welcome truly meant. After the honeymoon, we moved into Tom's apartment. It was spacious and modern, with a view of the city skyline that took my breath away. "This is perfect," I said, twirling around the living room. Tom grinned. "Wait till you see the kitchen." Mom insisted on getting all top-of-the-line appliances when I first moved in. I should have paid more attention to those words. Should have asked more questions. But I was too caught up in the excitement of starting our life together. The first few weeks were bliss. Tom and I fell into an easy rhythm, sharing chores and enjoying quiet evenings together. Then, one Saturday morning, it happened. I was in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes, when I heard the front door open. Thinking Tom had returned from his morning run, I called out, "Hope you're hungry, babe." But it wasn't Tom who walked into the kitchen. It was Margaret. "Oh, hello dear," she said, her eyes scanning the mess I'd made. "I thought I'd pop in and see how you two are settling in." I stood there, spatula in hand, completely stunned. "Margaret, how did you?" She dangled a key in front of me. I have a spare, of course. How else would I check on my Tommy? Margaret bustled past me, opening cupboards and peering into the fridge. I watched in disbelief as she pulled out cleaning supplies and started wiping down the already spotless counters. But, we're married now. You don't need to. Nonsense, she interrupted. Tommy's still my boy. And I have so much free time these days. I'm happy to help. For the next hour, I endured a running commentary on my housekeeping skills, or lack thereof, according to Margaret. By the time Tom returned, I was ready to scream. Mom? Tom said, surprise evident in his voice. What are you doing here? Margaret beamed at him. Just helping Sheila get things in order, dear. You know how overwhelming it can be for a new wife. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Tom shot me an apologetic look, but didn't say anything to contradict his mother. The next few weeks were a blur of unexpected visits and unsolicited advice. Margaret seemed to materialize in our apartment at the most inconvenient times, always armed with a critique and a story about her own domestic prowess. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, she burst in without warning. Oh, Sheila, she said, eyeing my neat piles of clothes. That's not how you fold t-shirts. Here, let me show you. I gritted my teeth. Margaret, I appreciate your help, but... Nonsense, she interrupted, already refolding a stack of Tom's shirts. I've been doing this for years. Did I ever tell you about my own mother-in-law? Now she was a piece of work. And so began another session of Margaret's favorite pastime, regaling me with tales of her own suffering at the hands of her mother-in-law. She used to come over unannounced, Margaret said, oblivious to the irony. Always criticizing my cooking, my cleaning. Nothing was ever good enough for her. I bit back the urge to point out the similarities. Instead, I forced a smile. That must have been difficult. Oh, it was, Margaret nodded sagely. But I endured it. And look how well Tommy turned out. You should be grateful I'm nothing like her. Grateful, right? Because having my privacy invaded and my abilities constantly questioned was such a blessing. As the days wore on, my patience wore thin. Margaret's visits became more frequent, her criticism more pointed. She'd run her finger along the top of the fridge, sking at imaginary dust. She'd reorganize the pantry, claiming she knew best how Tommy liked things. Tom, for his part, seemed oblivious to the tension. Mom's just trying to help, he'd say whenever I brought it up. She means well. But good intentions or not, I was at my breaking point. The constant intrusion, the endless criticism, the thinly veiled insults, it was all becoming too much. It came to a head one Sunday afternoon. I was in the middle of preparing dinner when Margaret waltzed in, key in hand. Sheila, dear, she called out, her voice sickeningly sweet. I thought I'd drop by and give you some pointers on proper meal planning. Tommy's always been particular about his Sunday roasts. I stood there, wooden spoon in hand, feeling something inside me snap. This was my home, my kitchen, my marriage. And I'd had enough. Taking a deep breath, I turned to face her. Margaret, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, we need to talk. Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. About what, dear? About boundaries, I replied. About privacy. I appreciate your intention to help, but coming over unannounced, criticizing everything I do, it's not helping. It's making me feel uncomfortable in my own home. She left without another word, the door slamming behind her. As the sound echoed through the apartment, I leaned against the counter, exhausted but oddly exhilarated. That evening, as Tom and I sat down for dinner, I knew I had to broach the subject. Tom, I started, pushing my food around on my plate, we need to talk about your mother. He sighed, putting down his fork. What's she done now? I took a deep breath and recounted the day's events, along with all the other incidents that had been building up. As I spoke, I could see the conflict in Tom's eyes, torn between his love for his mother and his commitment to me. Sheila, I know Mom can be intense, he said carefully. But she means well. She's just trying to help. I shook my head. Tom, I understand that. But this isn't help, it's control. She comes into our home uninvited, criticizes everything I do, and makes me feel like an intruder in my own life. It has to stop. Tom ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. What do you want me to do? I need you to set boundaries with her, I said firmly. Take back her key. Ask her to call before coming over. And most importantly, I need you to stand up for me when she oversteps. There was a long pause as Tom processed my words. Finally, he nodded. You're right. I'll talk to her. True to his word, Tom had a conversation with Margaret the next day. I wasn't present for it, but from what Tom told me, it didn't go well. Margaret was hurt and offended, claiming we were pushing her out of our lives. But in the end, she reluctantly agreed to our terms. For a while, things seemed to improve. Margaret's visits became less frequent and were always preceded by a phone call. But the peace was short-lived. It started with little things. Suddenly, I found myself uninvited to Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. When I asked Tom about it, he'd shrug uncomfortably. Mom says it's just immediate family this time, he'd say, not meeting my eyes. The final straw came on Tom's father Robert's birthday. Tom and I had planned to go together to wish him well, but at the last minute, Tom got called away on an urgent work matter. You should still go, Tom insisted. Dad would want to see you. Hesitantly, I agreed. I rang the doorbell, gift in hand, and waited. When Margaret opened the door, her eyes narrowed. Sheila, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. What a surprise. We weren't expecting you. This is a family gathering. And let's be honest, dear. You're not really family, are you? Her words hit me like a slap. I stood there, stunned, as she continued. You've made it quite clear that you don't want me in your life, she said. So I think it's best if you leave now. We wouldn't want any uninvited guests ruining Robert's special day. As if on cue, Robert appeared behind her. What's going on? He asked, looking between us. Margaret's demeanor changed instantly. Oh, Robert, she said, her voice trembling theatrically. Sheila here was just leaving. Isn't it awful how she's pushed me out of Tommy's life? Taken away my keys, forbidden me from visiting my own son? I felt my face burning with anger and humiliation. That's not true, I protested. I only asked for some boundaries. Enough, Robert said firmly, surprising us both. He turned to Margaret, his expression stern. That's enough, Margaret. Sheila is family, and she's welcome here. He then looked at me, his eyes softening. Please, come in, Sheila. We'd love to have you join us. Shocked and grateful, I stepped inside. Margaret, clearly furious, stormed off to the kitchen. As I followed Robert into the living room, I could feel the eyes of the other guests on me, curious about the scene they'd just witnessed. The next few years were a constant battle with Margaret. Despite our efforts to set boundaries, she always found ways to insert herself into our lives. Then, tragedy struck. Robert fell ill suddenly, his condition deteriorating rapidly. When he passed away, it felt like the world had shifted on its axis. The funeral was a somber affair, with Margaret stoically going through the motions, barely acknowledging my presence. After the service, Robert's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a kind-eyed man who had been his close friend, approached us. Mrs. Walker, if you and your son could join me in private? Mr. Walker left some specific instructions regarding his will. When they emerged, the atmosphere had changed drastically. Margaret looked pale and shocked, while Tom seemed confused and conflicted. As we drove home, Tom finally broke the silence. Dad left everything to me, he said quietly. The house, the savings, everything. Even Mom's house. I was stunned. What? But why? Tom shook his head. I don't know. The lawyer didn't explain. At that moment, I remembered Margaret's reaction. Her face had been a mix of disbelief and anger. I could have sworn I heard her mutter under her breath, "That fool," before composing herself. The next day, Margaret called Tom, her voice trembling. "Tommy, you're not going to kick me out, are you? This house, it's all I have left of your father." Tom's response was immediate. "Of course not, Mom. The house is yours to live in. And I'll set up a monthly allowance for you." I didn't object. It was Tom's inheritance, his money, his decision. And despite our differences, I couldn't imagine leaving Margaret homeless after losing her husband. However, our act of kindness did little to soften Margaret's attitude towards me. She stopped coming to our house, but her influence was still felt. She called Tom constantly, always with some emergency or excuse for why he needed to come over. "Tommy, the sink is leaking. I think I heard a strange noise in the attic. I'm not feeling well. Could you stay the night, just in case?" Tom, ever the dutiful son, would rush to her aid, often staying overnight. It was driving me crazy. As Margaret's birthday approached, I braced myself for another round of exclusion. For the past 2 years, I'd been pointedly uninvited from family gatherings, relegated to the role of outsider in my own marriage. So when Tom announced he had to leave on a last-minute business trip, I resigned myself to a quiet evening alone. I was surprised, then, when my phone rang the day before Margaret's birthday. Even more surprising was the name on the caller ID. "Sheila, dear," Margaret's voice oozed sweetness through the speaker. "I'm calling about my birthday celebration tomorrow. I know we've had our differences, but I'm tired of all this hostility. I'd like us to reconcile." I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, utterly dumbfounded. "You want me to come to your birthday party?" "Of course, dear. I know Tommy can't make it, but I'd love to see you there. What do you say?" Part of me wanted to refuse outright. After years of snubs and barely veiled insults, why should I believe this sudden change of heart? But Margaret's voice sounded so sincere, so genuinely warm, that I found myself wavering. "I suppose I could stop by," I heard myself say. "Wonderful," Margaret exclaimed. "It's at the Willow Creek Country Club. I'll see you at 7. The next evening, I found myself driving to the country club, a carefully chosen gift and a bouquet of flowers on the passenger seat beside me. As I approached the entrance, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. I pulled up to the security barrier, where a guard stepped out of his booth. "Name, please?" "Sheila Walker," I replied, trying to sound confident. The guard scanned his list, then frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't see that name here." "There must be some mistake," I said, my unease growing. "Margaret Walker invited me personally. I'm her daughter-in-law." The guard shook his head. "I'm sorry, but if you're not on the list, I can't let you in. It's a private event." Flustered, I got out of the car and pulled out my phone and called Margaret. After a few rings, she picked up. "Margaret, it's Sheila. I'm at the entrance, but they won't let me in." A few minutes later, I saw Margaret approaching the barrier, surrounded by a group of well-dressed guests. They were all laughing, glasses in hand, clearly enjoying the party that was already in full swing. As Margaret neared my car, I expected her to clear up the misunderstanding with the guard. Instead, she fixed me with a cold stare that sent chills down my spine. Well, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "If it isn't the little gold digger herself. Did you really think I'd let trash like you into my birthday celebration?" I stood there, stunned, as Margaret continued her tirade. "I specifically chose this venue to keep out unwanted elements like you. Why are you even here? You're not family. You're nothing but a money-hungry tramp who trapped my son." The guests behind her tittered, clearly enjoying the show. I felt my face burning with humiliation and anger. "But, you invited me," I stammered. "You said you wanted to reconcile." Margaret's laugh was cold and cruel. "Oh, you poor, naive girl. I wanted to see just how desperate you were to get your hands on our family's money. And look at you, showing up like a stray dog, begging for scraps. For a moment, I stood face to face with Margaret, seeing the malice gleaming in her eyes. Then, with deliberate slowness, I dropped the flowers and gift at her feet. Without another word, I got back in my car and drove away, Margaret's mocking laughter and the sounds of the party fading behind me. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling from Margaret's cruel words and actions. As soon as I walked through the door, I collapsed onto the couch and called Tom, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. Through tears and hiccups, I recounted the entire humiliating ordeal. Tom listened in stunned silence, only interrupting occasionally to ask for clarification. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then, Tom's voice came through, low and angry. "I'm coming home, and then I'm going to have a very serious conversation with my mother." True to his word, Tom was on the next flight home. When he arrived, he held me close, apologizing over and over for his mother's behavior. Then, with a determined look in his eye, he picked up the phone and called Margaret. I could hear Margaret's voice, shrill and defensive, through the speaker. But Tom's responses were calm and resolute. "No, Mom. This time you've gone too far. I don't want to hear your excuses. You humiliated my wife, the woman I love. No, I'm done. I'm cutting you off. No more allowance, no more help. You're on your own." For a week, we enjoyed a peace we hadn't known in years. No frantic calls from Margaret, no emergencies requiring Tom's immediate attention. It felt like we could finally breathe. But of course, it couldn't last. One afternoon, there was a knock at our door. When I opened it, I found Margaret standing there, her eyes red and puffy, her appearance disheveled. "How could you do this to me?" she wailed, pushing past me into the house. "I raised that boy. I devoted my entire life to him. And now, because of you, he's left me with nothing. No money, no support. I can barely afford to eat." She paced the living room, her voice rising hysterically. "It's all your fault. You turned him against me. You're the reason Robert disinherited me. You've ruined everything." I tried to interject, to defend myself, but Margaret was beyond reason. She continued her rant, tears streaming down her face, until she finally collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. After a few minutes, Margaret composed herself and left without another word, leaving me standing in the middle of the living room, confused and conflicted. As the door closed behind her, I made a decision. I needed answers, and I knew just who might have them. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Robert's lawyer in his office. The room was warm and inviting, with shelves lined with law books and framed diplomas on the walls. Mr. Thompson looked at me with kind eyes, his hands folded on the desk between us. "Mrs. Walker," he began, "I understand you have some questions about your father-in-law's will?" I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, I do. I need to understand why Robert left everything to Tom and nothing to Margaret. It just doesn't make sense." Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, a conflicted look crossing his face. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "Mrs. Walker, I've known the family for a long time, and what I'm about to tell you, well, it's not pleasant. The truth is, Margaret had been unfaithful to Robert." I felt my jaw drop. "What?" "She had a lover," Mr. Thompson continued. "A man who passed away shortly before Robert's death. This man left Margaret a significant amount of property in his will." I sat there, stunned, as Mr. Thompson went on. "Robert found out about the affair and the inheritance. They had a terrible argument, and that's when he decided to change his will, leaving everything to Tom." My mind was reeling. Margaret, who had always portrayed herself as the devoted wife and mother, had been living a double life. But Mr. Thompson wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, his voice somber. "Years ago, when Tom was just a boy, Robert's mother, Tom's grandmother, fell ill. She had saved money for years to afford a place in a private nursing home, where she hoped to spend her final days in comfort." I listened, a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. Margaret convinced Robert to sell his mother's property and send her to a state-run facility instead. They kept the money for themselves and rarely visited the poor woman. She passed away not long after, alone and neglected. I felt sick. The Margaret I knew was manipulative and cruel, but this was a level of callousness I couldn't have imagined. Robert carried that guilt with him for years, Mr. Thompson said softly. I think changing his will was his way of trying to make things right, to ensure that Margaret couldn't do to Tom what she had done to his mother. As I left Mr. Thompson's office, my head was spinning. The woman who had accused me of being a gold digger had been the real predator all along, pursuing her own interests at the expense of her family's well-being and happiness. That evening, when Tom came home from work, I sat him down and recounted everything I had learned from Mr. Thompson. Tom listened in stunned silence, his face a mix of disbelief, anger, and profound sadness. I can't believe it, he said when I finished, his voice barely above a whisper. All these years, she's been lying to us, manipulating us. We stayed up late into the night, talking through the implications of these revelations. Tom was devastated, but also resolute. This ends now, he said firmly. We didn't have to wait long for Margaret to make her next move. A few days later, she showed up at our door, all tears and pleas for help. Tommy, she began, her voice quavering. I know you're angry, but please. I need your help. I have nothing left. Tom's face was like stone as he replied. That's not true, is it, Mom? We know about your lover, about the apartment and money he left you. Margaret's face drained of color. What are you talking about? Drop the act, Tom said, his voice cold. We know everything. About your affair, about what you did to Grandma. All of it. Margaret's demeanor changed instantly. Gone was the pitiful, pleading woman. In her place stood someone I recognized all too well, calculating, angry, ready to lash out. How dare you, she shrieked. After everything I've done for you. You ungrateful, selfish boy. Tom didn't flinch. Ungrateful? You're right, I am. Unlike you, I won't be sending you to a state nursing home to die alone. Margaret recoiled as if she'd been slapped. Tom continued, his voice steady, I'm selling the house. You need to leave. Use the money and property your lover left you, and stop trying to deceive and use everyone around you. Margaret's indignant screams could probably be heard down the block, but Tom remained unmoved. He gave her a deadline to vacate the house, and true to his word, he sold it soon after. We later learned that Margaret had moved into the apartment left to her by her lover, evicting the current tenants and having to pay a hefty sum for breaking their lease. She tried calling Tom a few times after that, alternating between tearful pleas and angry accusations, but we stood firm in our decision to cut ties. As the dust settled from this tumultuous period, Tom and I found ourselves looking toward the future. And what a future it was shaping up to be. I was pregnant. We decided to sell our apartment and look for a small house, somewhere we could raise our child in peace, away from the shadows of the past. We were careful not to let any news of the pregnancy or our plans to move reach Margaret. The last thing we wanted was for her to find a way back into our lives, especially with a baby on the way. Driving away toward our new home and new life, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't experienced in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew Tom and I would face them together, stronger for having weathered this storm. At 34, I'm Monica, a successful journalist at a top fashion magazine and a well-known fashion blogger. As I sit in my office, surrounded by racks of designer clothes and stacks of glossy magazines, I can't help but feel a sense of pride. I've worked hard to get here, and every late night and early morning has been worth it. My phone buzzes with a notification. It's an email from my editor. Monica, great job on the latest piece. The readers are loving it. Keep it up. I smile to myself. This is what I live for, the rush of creating content that resonates with people, the thrill of being at the forefront of fashion trends. But it wasn't always like this. My mind drifts back to my childhood, to the house where I grew up. It was a nice house in the suburbs, but for me, it was more of a battlefield than a home. My sister, Sarah, is 7 years older than me. From the day I was born, she saw me as competition. I remember her constant need for attention, her jealousy, her manipulations. It's funny how some wounds never truly heal, even after all these years. There was this one time, when I was about 8. Sarah was 15 and had invited her friends over. I was in my room, reading a fashion magazine. Suddenly, I heard a crash from downstairs. My heart sank. I knew, somehow, that this wouldn't end well for me. I crept down the stairs to find my mother's favorite vase in pieces on the floor. Sarah and her friends were standing around it, looking guilty. But then Sarah's eyes locked with mine, and I saw a familiar glint in them. "Monica," she shrieked. "What have you done?" I stood there, mouth agape, as Sarah spun a tale of how I had been running wild through the house and knocked over the vase. Her friends, not wanting to get in trouble, nodded along. But I didn't, I started to say, but my parents had already made up their minds. "Monica, how could you be so careless?" my mother scolded. "You know how much I loved that vase." "You're grounded for a month," my father added. "And no pocket money until you've paid for a new vase." That night, as I lay in bed, I made a promise to myself. One day, I'd have my own place, my own life, far away from Sarah's shadow. And here I am now, living that promise. I've got my own house, bought with a mortgage I'm proud to pay off each month. It's my sanctuary, my piece of peace and quiet. As I wrap up my latest article on fall fashion trends, my mind wanders back to the day Sarah got married. I was 15, and I remember feeling an overwhelming sense of relief. Finally, I thought, I'd have some peace in my life. The wedding itself was a lavish affair. Sarah looked stunning in her white gown, but I couldn't help noticing the smug look she threw my way during the ceremony. A year after the wedding, Sarah had a daughter, my niece, Lily. As she grew, I found myself spending more and more time with her. Sarah seemed all too happy to pawn her off on me, preferring to spend her time gossiping with friends or scrolling endlessly on her phone. "Monica, can you take Lily this weekend?" Sarah's voice crackled through the phone. It was a familiar request. "I've got plans." I sighed, knowing full well that plans probably meant another meeting with chatty friends. "Sure, Sarah. I'd love to spend time with Lily." That weekend, I took Lily to a new children's entertainment complex that had just opened up in town. Her eyes lit up as we entered, taking in the colorful play areas and exciting activities. "Aunt Monica, look," Lily squealed, pointing at a giant slide. "Can we go on that?" I laughed, her excitement infectious. "Of course we can, sweetie. We can do whatever you want today." As I dropped Lily off at home that evening, I overheard Sarah arguing with her husband, Mason. Their voices were muffled, but I caught snippets about Sarah's frequent absences and her disinterest in family life. I quickly ushered Lily inside, not wanting her to hear the argument. But as I turned to leave, Mason caught my arm. "Monica," he said, his voice strained. "I don't know what to do anymore. Sarah's never home, and when she is, she's glued to her phone. It's like Lily and I don't even exist to her." "I'm sorry," I said, not knowing what else to say. "If there's anything I can do to help with Lily, just let me know." He nodded gratefully, and I left, feeling a mix of emotions. Anger at Sarah for neglecting her family, worry for Lily, and a strange sense of vindication. All those years of Sarah tormenting me, and now her true colors were showing to everyone else too. The day everything fell apart started like any other. I was at a cafe with my friends when my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice tense and brittle. "Monica, you need to come home. Now." I arrived at my parents' house to find chaos. Sarah was sobbing on the couch, mascara streaking down her face. My father was pacing, red-faced with anger. And in the corner, looking shell-shocked, was Sarah's husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, as I would learn. "He caught me," Sarah wailed between sobs. With her lover," Mason spat out. "In our own bed." I stood there, stunned. Despite knowing about Sarah's indiscretions, seeing the fallout was something else entirely. And then, as always, Sarah's eyes locked onto me. "This is your fault," she shrieked, pointing an accusing finger. "If you hadn't been so perfect, if you hadn't taken up so much of Mom and Dad's attention, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere for love." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even now, faced with the consequences of her own actions, Sarah was trying to blame me. "That's enough, Sarah," I said, my voice cold. "You made your choices. Don't you dare try to pin this on me." My parents, predictably, rushed to Sarah's defense. "Monica, how can you be so heartless?" my mother cried. "Your sister is hurting." I looked at them, these people who had always taken Sarah's side, who had never believed me when I told them about her cruelty. In that moment, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I'm done with the drama, the accusations, the constant favoritism. I'm moving out." My parents protested, but their words fell on deaf ears. I was 22, fresh out of college, and ready to start my own life. Within a week, I had found a small apartment across town and moved out of my childhood home. The next few years were a whirlwind. I landed an entry-level job at a fashion magazine, throwing myself into work with a passion born of determination to succeed on my own terms. Nights were spent poring over fashion blogs, learning everything I could about the industry. All the while, I kept my distance from my family. Sarah and Lily had moved back in with our parents, but I tried to go there as little as possible. Still, I made an effort to stay in touch with Lily. We'd meet for ice cream or trips to the park, away from the watchful eyes of Sarah and my parents. Lily was growing into a sweet, thoughtful girl, so different from her mother that it sometimes took my breath away. As the years rolled by, my career took off like a rocket. At 34, I found myself in a position I'd only dreamed of as a fresh-faced college graduate. Senior journalist at a top fashion magazine, my byline recognized by industry insiders and fashion enthusiasts alike. But that wasn't all. I'd also cultivated a significant following as a fashion blogger, my social media filled with outfit ideas, trend forecasts, and behind-the-scenes peeks at the glamorous world of high fashion. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another 1,000 followers on Instagram. I smiled to myself, remembering the days when I'd celebrate each new follower like a personal victory. As I flipped through the glossy photos, my mind wandered to my own wardrobe. I'd come a long way from the hand-me-downs and bargain bin finds of my youth. Now, my closet was filled with designer pieces, each one carefully chosen to reflect my personal style and the image I wanted to project to the world. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Lily, now a teenager. "Aunt Monica, can you help me pick an outfit for my friend's birthday party this weekend?" I smiled, warmth filling my chest. Despite the distance I'd put between myself and Sarah, Lily and I had managed to maintain a close relationship. She'd inherited my love for fashion, and I relished every opportunity to share that passion with her. "Of course, sweetie," I texted back. "Why don't you come over on Saturday morning and we'll put something together?" Sarah. The thought of my sister still brought a twinge of discomfort. We barely spoke these days, our interactions limited to terse exchanges at family gatherings I couldn't avoid. She was still living with our parents, still playing the role of the wronged woman, still using Lily as a pawn in her games. But I refused to let thoughts of Sarah dampen my mood. I had too much to be grateful for, too much to look forward to. My career was thriving, I had a beautiful home that I'd bought with my own hard-earned money, I had Alex, my fiancé, and I was finally, truly happy. As I scrolled through the latest runway looks on my tablet, my phone rang. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, and I sighed, bracing myself for what was to come. "Monica," Sarah's voice was sharp, demanding. "Lily needs a new outfit for her school dance. Something designer, obviously. Just make sure it's expensive and trendy. Lily needs to look better than those other girls." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at the phone, a mix of anger and resignation washing over me. How had I become responsible for dressing my niece? Despite my frustration with Sarah, I couldn't help but feel excited about shopping for Lily. At 15, she was developing her own sense of style, and I loved helping her explore that. The next day, Lily and I hit the mall. We spent hours trying on dresses, giggling over some of the more outrageous designs. In the end, we settled on a beautiful emerald green dress that made Lily's eyes sparkle. As we left the store, bags in hand, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of resentment. I loved spoiling Lily, but Sarah's expectation that I would foot the bill for all of Lily's clothing needs was becoming too much. A week later, I found myself at my parents' house for a family dinner. The tension was palpable as soon as I walked in. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence, Sarah sneered from her spot on the couch, phone in hand as usual. I ignored her, focusing instead on Lily, who ran to give me a hug. Aunt Monica, I wore the dress to the dance. Everyone loved it. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I smiled, genuinely happy for her. My mother's voice cut through the moment. Monica, don't you think it's a bit much? Buying such expensive clothes for Lily when your sister is struggling? I blinked, taken aback. Excuse me? My father chimed in, his tone disapproving. You're always dressed in designer clothes, driving that fancy car. Don't you think you could help out your family more? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Help out? I've been buying all of Lily's clothes for years now. Sarah hasn't spent a dime on her daughter's wardrobe and I don't know how long. Sarah's face twisted into a scowl. Oh, so now you're going to throw that in my face? Some of us don't have cushy jobs writing about shoes all day. I stood there, stunned into silence. How could they not see the truth? How could they still be taking Sarah's side after all these years? As I drove home that night, tears of frustration stinging my eyes, I realized that some things would never change. No matter how successful I became, no matter how much I did for Lily, in my family's eyes, I would always be the selfish one, the one who needed to do more. However, there was something else in my life, besides a good job and a terrible family. My fiancé. 2 years had flown by since I met Alex. When he proposed on a quiet evening at home, I didn't hesitate to say yes. As a fashion journalist, I knew the importance of the perfect wedding dress. I reached out to a young Italian designer I'd featured in one of my articles. His avant-garde approach to bridal wear had caught my eye, and I knew he could create something truly special. When the dress arrived, my hands shook as I unzipped the garment bag. The moment I saw it, my breath caught in my throat. It was perfect, a delicate peach color that complemented my skin tone, with intricate lace detailing and strategically placed rhinestones that caught the light beautifully. I slipped it on, my heart pounding. As I looked in the mirror, I knew this was it. The dress hugged my curves in all the right places, the color making me look radiant. I felt like a bride, like the successful, confident woman I'd become. Without thinking, I snapped a picture and sent it to Sarah. Despite our differences, she was still my sister, and some small part of me hoped she'd be happy for me. Got my wedding dress, I texted along with the photo. What do you think? Her response was typically Sarah. Bit much, isn't it? You always did like to show off. I sighed, putting my phone away. I don't know why I expected anything different. Carefully, I hung the dress in my closet, already dreaming of the day I'd walk down the aisle in it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Between finalizing the guest list, choosing a venue, and keeping up with my work, I barely had time to breathe, let alone visit my family. One evening, as I was going over seating arrangements, my phone rang. It was my mother. Monica, we haven't seen you in weeks, she said, her tone accusatory. Lily's been asking about you. Guilt washed over me. In all the wedding chaos, I'd neglected my relationship with Lily. I'm sorry, Mom. Things have been crazy with the wedding planning. About that, my mother's voice took on a familiar disapproving tone. How much are you spending on this wedding? You know, a modest ceremony would be just as meaningful. I frowned. Mom, I don't think that's any of your business. Of course it is, she exclaimed. We're your family. And speaking of family, have you thought about how you could help your sister instead of spending all this money on one day? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger, this is my wedding. Alex and I are paying for it ourselves. How we spend our money is our business, not yours, and certainly not Sarah's. Don't be so selfish, Monica, my mother scolded. Family should come first. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness wash over me. Even now, with one of the happiest days of my life approaching, my family couldn't simply be happy for me. Everything always had to revolve around Sarah and her needs. Just as the dust was settling from the wedding dress drama, a new storm was brewing. Lily was graduating high school, and with graduation came the inevitable school ball. My phone rang one afternoon while I was in the middle of a photo shoot. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. Monica, Sarah's voice was demanding as ever. Lily needs a dress for her graduation ball. I want you to buy her one from that new collection by, what's his name? The famous one you're always going on about. I knew exactly which designer she meant, and exactly how much his dresses cost. Sarah, those dresses are incredibly expensive. We're talking thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. I'm not spending that kind of money on a dress Lily will wear once. It's not reasonable. Fine, Sarah spat. I'll tell Mom and Dad how greedy you're being. Don't bother calling Lily anymore. She hung up, leaving me standing in the middle of the studio, shaking with anger and frustration. True to her word, my parents called later that day, berating me for my selfishness and lack of family values. After a sleepless night, I came up with a solution. I called Lily, hoping she would answer, despite her mother's threats. Lily, sweetie, I said, relieved to hear her voice. I have an idea about your graduation dress. Why don't you come over and borrow one of mine? I have plenty of designer dresses you could choose from. There was a pause, then Lily's excited voice came through. Really, Aunt Monica? That would be amazing. I could hear Sarah in the background, asking what was going on. After a moment, Sarah came on the line. Fine, she said grudgingly. We'll be over next week. A week later, I was at home, deep in concentration as I finished up an article for the magazine. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Sarah and Lily. The dresses are upstairs in the guest room closet, I said, gesturing towards the stairs. Why don't you two go up and take a look? I just need to finish this article. Sarah nodded curtly and led Lily upstairs. I returned to my computer, immersing myself back in my work. It seemed like only minutes had passed when I heard them coming back down. That was fast, I said, surprised. Did you find something you liked, Lily? But before Lily could answer, Sarah was hurrying her out the door. We need to go, she said abruptly. Thanks for this. A few days after Sarah and Lily's strange visit, I decided to try on my wedding dress again. With all the family drama, I needed a reminder of the joy that was to come. I opened my closet, reached for the garment bag, and it wasn't there. Panic set in as I searched frantically through my entire wardrobe. The beautiful peach dress was nowhere to be found. And then it hit me, Sarah and Lily's hasty departure, their refusal to show me what they'd chosen. They hadn't borrowed a dress, they'd stolen my wedding gown. Furious, I drove to my parents' house. I burst through the door without knocking, making a beeline for Lily's room. There, hanging in her closet, was my peach wedding dress. Lily, I called out, my voice shaking with anger and disappointment. How could you do this? Why would you take my wedding dress? Lily appeared in the doorway, her face pale and eyes wide with shame. Before she could speak, Sarah pushed past her, her face twisted with rage. How dare you barge in here and accuse my daughter? Sarah spat. You're so greedy, you can't even lend a dress to your own niece for her graduation? I was stunned. Lend? Sarah, you stole my wedding dress. This isn't just any dress, it's for my wedding day. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Oh, please. You have plenty of dresses. You're just jealous that Lily will look better in it than you ever could. Jealous? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sarah, you're the one who's always been jealous of my career, my success. The room fell silent. Then, from behind me, I heard my mother's voice. Monica, how dare you speak to your sister that way? I turned to see both my parents standing there, their faces masks of disappointment and anger. But she stole my wedding dress, I protested. My father shook his head. Always so selfish, Monica. Can't you think of anyone but yourself for once? I stood there, feeling like I was drowning. How had this happened? How was I the villain in this story? Without another word, I grabbed my dress and left. The next day, my phone rang. It was Lily. Aunt Monica, I'm so sorry. Her voice was small, trembling. I didn't know it was your wedding dress. Mom said, she said you'd want me to have it. We didn't even look at the other dresses. I'm so sorry. My anger melted away. Of course Sarah had manipulated the situation, used Lily as a pawn in her games. Oh, Lily, I sighed. It's okay. I understand. How about we go shopping for a new dress? Your own dress, not a borrowed one. Really? The hope in her voice was palpable. But I can't afford a nice dress. Don't worry about that, I said. But I have a proposal. The dress will be yours, but you'll pay it off in installments. By helping me with my wedding preparations. The day after our phone call, Lily and I hit the stores. It was a day filled with laughter, honest conversations, and a deepening of our bond. We finally settled on a stunning midnight blue gown that made Lily look like a princess. On the night of her graduation, Lily was radiant. As I watched her laughing with her friends, posing for photos, I felt a bittersweet pang. This wonderful young woman had grown up so fast, and I was grateful to be a part of her life. After the ceremony, as we sat in a quiet corner, I took a deep breath. Lily, there's something I need to tell you. She looked at me, her eyes curious. I've decided not to invite your mother to my wedding, I said gently. And I don't think I'll be communicating with her anymore. Lily nodded slowly, surprising me with her calm reaction. I understand, Aunt Monica. So, does this mean I can't come to the wedding either? Oh, no, I exclaimed. Lily, you're absolutely invited. In fact, I was hoping you'd be one of my bridesmaids. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of wedding preparations, with Lily by my side every step of the way. When my parents found out about my decision to exclude Sarah, they called to inform me that they wouldn't be attending either. To my surprise, I felt more relieved than upset. The day of my wedding arrived, bright and beautiful. As I stood in front of the mirror in my peach dress, Lily helping me with the final touches, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The ceremony was perfect. Alex's face as I walked down the aisle, the love radiating from our friends and chosen family, Mason's surprising presence, my ex-brother-in-law. It all combined to create a day full of joy and new beginnings. As the reception wound down, Lily approached me, excitement written all over her face. Aunt Monica, I got into college. In New York. Dad's helping me with the tuition. I hugged her tightly, thrilled for her new adventure. Oh, Lily, that's wonderful. You're going to do great things, I just know it. In the months that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Lily moved to New York for college, calling me regularly for advice on everything from fashion to study habits. I want to be just like you, Aunt Monica, she'd say, making my heart swell with pride. I threw myself back into my work with renewed passion, my personal life finally free from the drama that had plagued it for so long. Alex was supportive and understanding, a true partner in every sense of the word. My name is Audrey, and I was born into what you might call a typical middle-class family. My father was an entrepreneur, always busy with his business, while my mother ruled our home with an iron fist. I had an older sister who seemed to be the perfect daughter in my mother's eyes. From a young age, I learned that in our house, what Mom said was law. Whatever Lisa did, I had to do too. Whatever Mom decided, that was final. Dad would sometimes try to intervene, but he was rarely home, and when he was, Mom always found a way to get her way. As I grew older, the control only tightened. Every decision, from what clothes I wore to what friends I could have, seemed to be made for me. Lisa, meanwhile, flourished under Mom's guidance. She was the golden child, always doing exactly what was expected of her. When Lisa was in her final year of high school, she started dating Richard, the son of a local business tycoon. Mom was over the moon. Did you see how he looked at her? Mom gushed after their first dinner together. Mark my words, we'll be planning a wedding before you know it. I rolled my eyes, but kept quiet. I was in my sophomore year, and I'd learned by now that disagreeing with Mom only led to arguments I couldn't win. Sure enough, Lisa and Richard's relationship progressed quickly. By the time I was a senior, they were engaged, and Mom couldn't have been happier. Now, Audrey, she said one evening, her eyes gleaming with a look I'd come to dread, we need to start thinking about your future too. Lisa's done so well for herself, and you're such a pretty girl. I'm sure we can find you a nice young man from a good family. I felt my stomach twist. Mom, I'm not even out of high school yet. Can't I focus on college first? She waved her hand dismissively. College is important, of course, but so is securing your future. You know, Richard has a cousin who's just a few years older than you. He helps run the family business. I think you two would hit it off splendidly. And just like that, my fate was being decided for me. Again. I looked to Dad for help, but he just gave me a weak smile and retreated to his study. I was on my own, as usual. Just as Mom had orchestrated, I found myself on a date with Richard's cousin, James. He was handsome, I'll give him that, but from the moment we met, something felt off. So, Audrey, James said, leaning back in his chair at the upscale restaurant he'd chosen, I hear you're headed to college soon. Any thoughts on what you'll study? I opened my mouth to answer, but he cut me off. Business, right? It's the smart choice. You'll need to understand how things work when you're part of our family. I blinked, taken aback. Actually, I was thinking about. Trust me, he interrupted again. Business is the way to go. I'll talk to the admissions office at my alma mater. They owe me a favor. And that's how it went. James talked, I listened, and any attempt I made to voice my own opinions was swiftly overridden. By the end of the night, I felt suffocated. Despite my reservations, Mom and Lisa were ecstatic. He's perfect for you, Lisa squealed when I got home. Did you see his watch? That alone probably cost more than Dad makes in a month. I forced a smile, not wanting to burst their bubble. But as the weeks went by and James and I continued to date, I felt increasingly uncomfortable. He was always telling me what to do, what to wear, how to act. It was like having another mother, only worse. One evening, after a particularly stifling date where James had planned our next 3 outings without even asking me, I'd had enough. I called him the next day. James, I think we need to talk, I said, my heart pounding. Sure, babe. What's up? His cavalier tone grated on my nerves. I took a deep breath. I don't think this is working out. You're a great guy, but... Whoa, hold on, he cut in. Is this because I ordered for you last night? I told you, I know what's best. You'll learn to appreciate it. No, James. It's not just that. I don't think we're compatible. I want to break up. There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was cold. You're making a mistake, Audrey. You won't find better than me. Think about your family, about your future. Don't be stupid. I hung up, my hands shaking. I'd done it. I'd broken free. But my relief was short-lived. The moment Mom found out, all hell broke loose. What were you thinking? She screeched. James is perfect for you. Do you want to end up alone? Do you want to shame this family like that? I stood my ground, but the pressure was immense. Day after day, Mom and Lisa tag-teamed me, wearing down my resolve. They'd arrange accidental meetings with James, leaving us alone together when he'd stop by to see Mom. The constant barrage was exhausting. Each day, I felt my resolve weakening. Finally, worn down by the relentless pressure, I gave up. "Fine," I told Mom, my voice hollow. "I'll give James another chance." The look of triumph on her face made my stomach turn, but I was too tired to fight anymore. I began to accept James's courtship again, going through the motions of the relationship they all wanted from me. Mom and Lisa were overjoyed. In the evenings, I'd overhear them excitedly planning for the future, discussing how they would manage the brothers' company once James and I were married. They dreamed aloud about all the money and the entire business that would become available to them. As if controlling my love life wasn't enough, Lisa took it upon herself to plan my entire career. One evening, she burst into my room, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Audrey, I've got it all figured out," she exclaimed. "There's a perfect position for you in Richard and James' company. You'll be the head of PR. That's why you're going to Hillside Business College. I've already picked out your classes." My protests fell on deaf ears. Before I knew it, I was enrolled in Hillside, studying subjects I had zero interest in. Each day was a struggle, and I felt my spirit dying a little more with every class. After a particularly grueling week, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Dad, telling him everything. To my surprise and relief, he listened. "Audrey," he said finally, "this is your life. If you're not happy, then it's time for a change. I'll support you, whatever you decide." With Dad's blessing and financial support, I made my escape. I applied to a college in another city, one that offered programs I was genuinely interested in. When I got accepted, I packed my bags and left without looking back. Once I was settled in my new city, I knew there was one more thing I had to do. With trembling hands, I wrote a message to James. "James, I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I don't love you, and I don't want to see you again. Please respect my decision." I hit send, hoping he'd understand. His reply came quickly, and my heart sank as I read it. "Audrey, you're not thinking straight. I'm going to talk to your mother and Lisa. They'll knock some sense into you. You're not going anywhere, babe. We're meant to be together." I felt sick. Even miles away, they were trying to control me. Months passed, and I thrived in my new environment. I made friends, excelled in my classes, and for the first time in years, I felt like myself. Then, at a graduation party for a friend, I met him. Tom, the brother of one of the graduates. He was kind, funny, and most importantly, he listened when I spoke. We started dating, and I fell hard. This wasn't the manufactured affection I'd felt for James. This was real, all-consuming love. When Tom proposed a year later, I didn't hesitate to say yes. With shaking hands, I dialed my parents' number. "Mom, Dad," I said when they picked up, "I'm coming home for a visit. And I'm bringing my fiancé." The silence on the other end was deafening. When we arrived at my parents' house, Dad greeted us warmly, genuine happiness shining in his eyes. Mom and Lisa, however, were cold and aloof. At dinner, the interrogation began. "So, Tom," Mom said, her voice sickly sweet, "what position do you hold in your company?" Tom looked confused. "Oh, I'm just starting out. Entry-level marketing associate." I saw the disappointment flash in Mom's eyes. Lisa jumped in. "And what about your family's business?" "We don't have a family business," Tom replied honestly. "My parents are teachers." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Mom's smile became forced. "Audrey, dear, can I speak to you in the kitchen?" In the kitchen, Mom's facade cracked. "Are you insane?" she hissed. "You had James, a successful, wealthy man who could provide for you. And you choose this?" Before I could respond, the front door opened. To my horror, James walked in, as if he owned the place. He strode over to me, throwing an arm around my shoulders. "Hey babe, miss me?" Tom stood up, his face flushed with anger. He ordered James to get away from me. Mom turned to him, her voice ice cold. "You arrogant, ill-mannered boy. How dare you come into our home and try to steal our daughter? Get out, now." I'd had enough. I shrugged off James' arm and took Tom's hand. "We're leaving," I announced, my voice steady despite the chaos around me. As we walked out, I could hear Mom, Lisa, and James shouting after us. But for once, I didn't care. I was choosing my own path, with someone who truly loved me for who I was. Despite the drama with my family, Tom and I went ahead with our wedding plans. The day finally arrived, and it was beautiful, almost perfect. The only shadow on our happiness was the conspicuous absence of my mother and sister. During the reception, I couldn't escape the concerned looks and whispered questions from relatives. I could see the confusion and concern on the faces of Tom's family. How could I explain that my own mother and sister had chosen not to come because they disapproved of the man I loved? After the wedding, Tom and I settled into his apartment, ready to start our new life together. For the most part, things were wonderful. We were happy, in love, and excited about our future. But there was one recurring nightmare: family holidays at my parents' house. The first Thanksgiving after our wedding, we decided to attend, hoping for reconciliation. Big mistake. As we walked in, I froze. There, sitting at the dining table like he belonged, was James. "Audrey," Mom exclaimed, her voice sickly sweet. "Look who decided to join us. Isn't it nice of James to come?" I saw Tom's jaw clench, but he remained silent. As we were cleaning up, James cornered me in the kitchen. "Hey, Audrey," he said, leaning in close. "Can we talk privately, for old time's sake?" Before I could respond, Tom appeared, his face thunderous. He grabbed James by the shirt, pushing him back. "Stay away from my wife," he growled. Mom burst in, her face red with anger. "How dare you," she shrieked at Tom. "Get out of my house, you brute." We left, and I thought that would be the end of it. But every holiday, every family gathering, the same scene played out. James would be there, Mom would fawn over him, and Tom and I would leave feeling hurt and angry. The final straw came when I saw the social media posts. Mom and Lisa had shared childhood photos of me, pictures of James and me together, all with captions about how I had abandoned the family, how Tom was tearing the family apart. That night, I sat down at my computer and began to type. I poured out everything: the years of manipulation, the pressure to be with James, the constant undermining of my choices. I described how they had tried to control every aspect of my life, from my career to my love life. I explained why Tom and I had stopped coming to family events, detailing the uncomfortable situations we'd been put in. The response was overwhelming. Comments flooded in from relatives and friends, many expressing shock at what I'd been through and offering support. The tide of family opinion had turned. Where once there had been judgment, now there was understanding. Where there had been sympathy for Mom and Lisa, now there was criticism of their controlling behavior. After my big post online, I stopped talking to my mom and sister. I did talk to my dad, though, and he was really supportive. This made my mom really angry. She yelled at Dad, trying to get him to make me divorce Tom and marry James instead. Dad had always done what Mom wanted, but this time was different. He'd had enough. He shouted back at her and even gave her divorce papers. They split up, and Dad let Mom keep the house so he wouldn't have to pay her money every month. He moved out with just one suitcase. He had some savings, so he rented a place near me and Tom. Mom and Lisa, predictably, didn't take this well. Their social media accounts exploded with posts accusing me of turning Dad against Mom, of destroying our family. The psychological pressure was relentless. Unable to bear it any longer, I blocked their accounts and made my own profiles private. As I clicked the confirm button, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. At first, I thought it was just stress, but as the feeling persisted, a different possibility crossed my mind. A quick trip to the pharmacy and an anxious wait later, my suspicion was confirmed: I was pregnant. Joy and fear warred within me. Would this news finally make Mom and Lisa back off? My hope was short-lived. Somehow, Mom found out about my pregnancy, probably through one of the relatives I hadn't blocked. But instead of reaching out with congratulations or reconciliation, she started a vicious rumor campaign. "Did you hear?" my cousin texted me. "Your mom is telling everyone the baby is James's. She says you've been sneaking around behind Tom's back." I stared at the message in disbelief, my hand instinctively moving to my still flat stomach. How could she stoop so low? The stress was becoming unbearable. Tom found me crying on the couch that evening. Without a word, he wrapped me in his arms, letting me sob into his shirt. When I finally calmed down, he gently lifted my chin, his eyes full of love and concern. "This has to stop," he said softly. "You need a break from all this drama. How about a vacation? Just you, somewhere peaceful, to relax and focus on yourself and our baby." The idea was tempting, but I hesitated. "I can't just leave you to deal with all this." He smiled, shaking his head. "I'll be fine. You and the little one are my priority. Let me take care of you." Before I knew it, Tom had booked me a week-long stay at a serene country resort. As I packed my bags, I felt a glimmer of hope. A week away from all the chaos, a chance to breathe and center myself, it sounded like heaven. For the first few days of my vacation, I finally found the peace I'd been craving. The country resort was beautiful, with its lush forests and serene lakes. I spent my time reading, taking gentle walks, and just breathing in the fresh air. It felt like I could finally relax. But on the third day, my tranquility was shattered. As I walked into the resort's dining area, I froze. There, at a nearby table, were Lisa, her husband Richard, and James. My heart sank. This couldn't be a coincidence. Lisa spotted me and waved enthusiastically, as if we were the best of friends. "Audrey, what a surprise. Come join us." I shook my head. "Please, just leave me alone. I'm here to rest." But Lisa wouldn't take no for an answer. For the next 2 days, she kept showing up wherever I went. She'd sit at my table with Richard and James, chatting and laughing as if everything was normal. She was constantly taking selfies of the four of us, posting them online with captions like "family reunion" and "so great to reconnect." I felt sick. I knew what she was doing, trying to create a false narrative, to make it look like I was happily spending time with James. She wanted to cause problems between me and Tom. I texted my husband about what's going on here. By the 5th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to cut my trip short and go home. As I was leaving my room with my suitcase, Lisa appeared at the top of the stairs. "Audrey, wait," she called out. "You can't leave. James is ready to forgive you. He says he'll even adopt your baby. He still wants to marry you." I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with my pregnancy. "I'm not feeling well, Lisa. Please, just leave me alone." I turned to go down the stairs, but Lisa grabbed my arm. "You're such a fool," she hissed. "Can't you see what's best for you?" "Let go of me," I shouted, trying to pull away. She released my arm, but the sudden movement threw me off balance. I felt myself falling, tumbling down the stairs. The world spun around me, and then everything went black. When I came to, I was at the bottom of the stairs. Tom was leaning over me, his face pale with worry. How had he gotten here? The pain in my abdomen was excruciating. The next few hours passed in a blur of ambulance sirens, hospital corridors, and doctors' concerned faces. Despite their best efforts, it was too late. I had lost the baby. As I lay in the hospital bed, Tom holding my hand, the full weight of what had happened crashed over me. The vacation that was supposed to be my escape had turned into a nightmare. My sister's relentless pursuit of her own agenda had cost me my child. In the aftermath of the tragedy, my grief turned to rage. The loss of my child was not just a terrible accident, It was the result of Lisa's reckless and manipulative behavior. With Tom's support, I decided to take legal action against my sister. The court case was grueling, but justice was on my side. Several resort guests had witnessed Lisa's confrontation with me on the stairs. Their testimonies, along with security camera footage, provided irrefutable evidence of her dangerous actions. The judge ruled in my favor, awarding me $10,000 in compensation. When news of the lawsuit reached my mother, her reaction was swift and harsh. She called me, her voice cold and cutting. "You've gone too far this time, Audrey," she spat. "Suing your own sister? You're no longer my daughter." The line went dead, and with it, the last thread connecting me to my mother snapped. Despite the finality of it, I felt a strange sense of relief. Tom and I decided it was time for a fresh start. We sold our apartment and bought a new house with a mortgage. We were careful to keep our new address a secret from my mother and sister. Only Dad knew where we lived now, and he promised to keep it to himself. The move was just the beginning of our healing process. I started seeing a psychologist, working through the trauma of losing our child and the years of family manipulation. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. As months passed, our life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Then, one morning, I discovered I was pregnant again. Joy mingled with fear as I shared the news with Tom. "We'll keep it between us for now," he said, holding me close. "No one else needs to know until you're ready." We guarded our secret carefully, telling no one, not even my dad. I was extra cautious, following every bit of advice from my doctor. As my belly grew, we finally shared the news with Dad, swearing him to secrecy. The pregnancy progressed without complications, each week bringing a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Finally, after what felt like the longest 9 months of my life, our daughter was born, a healthy, beautiful baby girl. Life had settled into a beautiful rhythm. Our daughter, Lily, was now 6 months old, filling our days with joy and laughter. Tom and I had found our groove as parents, and with each passing day, the pain of our past faded a little more. One afternoon, as I was putting Lily down for her nap, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer it. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Audrey, it's your mother." I nearly dropped the phone in shock. Before I could respond, she continued, her voice uncharacteristically meek. "Your sister is here too. We need your help." As they explained their situation, I felt a mix of emotions, pity, anger, and a strange sense of vindication. Lisa's husband had gone bankrupt, and she had left him. They were in dire financial straits. "We need you to talk to your father," Mom said. "Convince him to help us out. And, we need you to return the compensation money from the lawsuit." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I'm sorry, but I can't do that. Dad makes his own decisions, and that money was awarded by the court. Please don't contact me again." Just then, Lily started crying in the next room. Mom's voice sharpened. "Is that a baby? Audrey, do you have a child?" I closed my eyes, cursing the timing. "Yes, I have a daughter." "A granddaughter?" Mom's voice rose. "How dare you keep this from me? I demand to see her." "You can't keep my grandchild from me." Her shouting woke Lily fully, and her cries grew louder. I felt my own anger rising. "You lost any right to be in my child's life when you disowned me," I said, my voice cold. "If you or Lisa try to contact us again, I'll file for a restraining order. Goodbye." I hung up and immediately blocked the number, my hands shaking. Tom came in, carrying a fussing Lily. "Who was that?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "My mother and sister," I said, taking Lily into my arms. "They're having money troubles and wanted help." I said no. Tom nodded, pulling us both into a hug. "You did the right thing," he said softly. Later that week, I called Dad to warn him about Mom and Lisa's situation. He sighed heavily. "I know, sweetheart. They tried to contact me too," he said. I've heard through the grapevine that they've been evicted from their home. They're living in a pretty rough area now. I felt a twinge of sadness, quickly replaced by resolve. They made their choices, Dad. We can't let them drag us back into their drama. You're right, he agreed. How's my little princess doing? As I updated him on Lily's latest milestones, I felt a wave of gratitude. Despite everything, I had this, a loving husband, a beautiful daughter, and a father who stood by me. We had built a life filled with love and respect, far from the manipulation and drama of my past. My name is Melissa, and I grew up in a typical middle-class family. Mom worked as a nurse, and Dad was a mechanic. We weren't rich, but we had enough to get by comfortably. After graduating from college with a degree in education, I landed a job at a public elementary school in my hometown. My days were filled with lesson plans, finger paintings, and the infectious laughter of children. One Friday evening, my best friend Sarah insisted I join her for a party. Reluctantly, I agreed. I threw on a simple blue dress and headed to the address Sarah had texted me. The party was in full swing when I arrived, the small apartment packed with people I didn't know. Melissa, Sarah's voice cut through the noise. She appeared at my side, grinning widely. I'm so glad you came. There's someone I want you to meet. Before I could protest, she was dragging me through the crowd. We stopped in front of a tall, handsome man with dark hair and warm brown eyes. Melissa, this is Jack, Sarah said, practically beaming. Jack, meet my best friend, Melissa. Jack smiled and extended his hand. Nice to meet you, Melissa. Sarah's told me a lot about you. We fell into an easy conversation about my job, his work as a software developer, and our shared love of old movies. Before I knew it, hours had passed, and the party was winding down. As I was getting ready to leave, Jack approached me. I really enjoyed talking to you tonight, Melissa. Would you like to grab coffee sometime? My heart skipped a beat. I'd like that, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We exchanged numbers, and I left the party feeling giddy. The next day, I woke up to a text from Jack. Good morning, Melissa. How about that coffee? Are you free this afternoon? I replied quickly, and we made plans to meet at a local cafe. That coffee date was the beginning of something special. Over the next few weeks, Jack and I saw each other regularly. We went to movies, tried new restaurants, and took long walks in the park. With each date, I felt myself falling for him more and more. One evening, about a month after we met, Jack took me to a fancy restaurant for dinner. As we finished our meal, he reached across the table and took my hand. Melissa, he said, his eyes serious. I really like you. I was wondering if you'd like to be my girlfriend? My heart soared. Yes, Jack. I'd love to be your girlfriend. Jack was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner, kind, funny, and supportive. One evening, as we cuddled on my couch watching an old black and white film, I turned to Jack. Have you told your parents about us? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Jack's body tensed slightly. Not yet, he replied, his eyes fixed on the TV screen. I haven't found the right moment. I'll tell them when the time is right. I wanted to press the issue, but something in Jack's demeanor made me hold back. Instead, I snuggled closer to him, pushing my concerns to the back of my mind. The next week, I invited Jack to dinner at my parents' house. Mom and Dad had been asking to meet him for weeks, and I was excited for them to get to know the man I was falling in love with. Mom, Dad, this is Jack, I said, beaming as we walked into the living room. My parents welcomed Jack warmly. Mom had prepared her famous pot roast, and we all sat down to a lovely meal. The conversation flowed easily, with Jack charming my parents with stories about his work and his travels. The evening ended on a high note, with my parents pulling me aside as Jack went to get our coats. He's wonderful, honey, Mom whispered, giving me a hug. We're so happy for you. As Jack and I drove home, I couldn't help but bring up the subject of his parents again. Jack, why haven't you introduced me to your family yet? Are you ashamed of me? Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Of course not, Melissa. It's just, my parents can be a bit difficult. I want to make sure the timing is right. I sighed, not entirely satisfied with his answer, but decided to let it go for now. Our relationship continued to grow stronger over the next year and a half. Yet, the issue of his parents remained a sore spot. Every time I brought it up, Jack would find a way to change the subject or make light of the situation. I tried to be patient, to trust that he had his reasons, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me. Then, on a crisp autumn evening, everything changed. Jack proposed to me at the restaurant, and I agreed to the sound of applause from other customers. On the drive home, still giddy with excitement, I turned to Jack. I can't wait to tell my parents. They're going to be so thrilled. Jack smiled, but I noticed a hint of tension in his expression. Actually, Mel, I think it's time you met my parents. How about we go see them this weekend? I was surprised by the sudden change of heart, but delighted nonetheless. Really? That would be wonderful, Jack. When we pulled up to Jack's childhood home, I couldn't help but gasp. The house was enormous, a sprawling mansion with manicured lawns and a fountain in the circular driveway. In the parking area, I spotted 3 luxury cars that probably cost more than my yearly salary. Jack, I whispered, my eyes wide. You never told me your family was, well, rich. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. It never seemed important. Come on, let's go in. As we approached the front door, it swung open to reveal a statuesque woman with perfectly coiffed hair and an expensive-looking suit. Jack, darling, she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug. Her eyes fell on me, and I saw a flicker of something, disappointment, cross her face. And you must be Melissa, she said, her tone noticeably cooler. I'm Victoria, Jack's mother. Please, come in. We followed her into a lavish living room where Jack's father, Richard, was waiting. He greeted us warmly, shaking my hand with a firm grip. So, you're the young lady who's stolen our Jack's heart, he said with a smile. Victoria gestured for us to sit and then began her interrogation. So, Melissa, tell us about yourself. What do you do for a living? I'm a teacher at Jefferson Elementary, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I teach 3rd grade. Victoria's eyebrows rose. A teacher? How quaint. And your family? What do they do? I explained about my parents' occupations, watching as Victoria's expression grew more and more disapproving. By the time I finished, the atmosphere in the room was tense. Victoria smiled tightly. Well, Melissa, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I must say, you're not quite what I had in mind for Jack. You're simply not the kind of girl I envisioned as a daughter-in-law. I felt as if I'd been slapped. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Richard cleared his throat. Victoria, that's enough. Jack is old enough to make his own decisions about who he wants to marry. Victoria pursed her lips, but said nothing more. The rest of the visit passed in uncomfortable small talk until Jack and I made our excuses to leave. As we drove home in silence, I finally let the tears fall. They hate me, don't they? I choked out. Jack reached over and took my hand. They don't hate you, Mel. My mother, she's just very particular. That's why I put off this meeting for so long. I'm sorry you had to go through that. In the months following our engagement, Jack and I threw ourselves into wedding planning. We wanted a small, intimate ceremony with just our closest friends and family. However, Victoria had other ideas. One afternoon, as Jack and I were discussing potential venues, my phone rang. It was Victoria. Melissa, dear, she said, her voice sickly sweet. I've been thinking about your wedding. I've taken the liberty of contacting some of the finest venues in the city. Oh, and I have a list of at least 100 guests we simply must invite. I felt my stomach drop. That's very kind of you, Victoria, but Jack and I were hoping for something smaller. Nonsense, she interrupted. My son is getting married. It has to be a grand affair. I want all my friends to see how happy he is. The next day, we met with Victoria to discuss the wedding plans. Jack was firm, explaining that we wanted a small ceremony and couldn't afford an extravagant affair. Victoria's face turned cold. I see. Well, if that's how you feel, perhaps I should withdraw my offer to help. After all, it seems you two have it all figured out. Despite the tension, we stood our ground. In the end, we planned the wedding we wanted, a simple ceremony in a local park, followed by a reception at a charming restaurant. The morning of the wedding arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. The ceremony was beautiful. Jack's eyes filled with tears as I walked down the aisle, and when we said our vows, I felt like my heart might burst with happiness. During the toasts, Victoria stood up, glass in hand. My stomach clenched, dreading what she might say. Well, she began, her voice carrying across the room. This certainly isn't the wedding I envisioned for my son. But I suppose we must make do with what we have. A shocked murmur ran through the guests. Victoria continued, her words becoming increasingly critical of the simple decorations, the food, and even my dress. With each word, I felt smaller and more humiliated. Finally, she turned her gaze directly to me. I must say, I'm not entirely comfortable in this company. I think it's best if I take my leave early. With that, she set down her glass and swept out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Our friends and family rallied around us, offering words of support and trying to lift the mood. Gradually, the party resumed, and by the end of the night, Victoria's dramatic exit was almost forgotten in the joy of celebration. After our honeymoon, Jack and I settled into married life in his apartment. However, my happiness was short-lived as Victoria began to make her presence felt in increasingly intrusive ways. One afternoon, I came home early from school to find Victoria in our living room, rearranging our furniture. I was shocked to see her there, especially since we hadn't given her a key. When Jack got home, I told him what had happened. He looked uncomfortable, but promised to talk to his mother about boundaries. However, Victoria's unexpected visits continued. She'd show up unannounced, always with some excuse about helping or checking on us. One day, as I was leaving for work, I overheard Victoria talking to our neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, in the hallway. I stopped short when I heard my name. You know, you really should keep an eye on Melissa, Victoria was saying in a low voice. She comes from a less desirable area. One can never be too careful with their jewelry. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a change in how some of our neighbors treated me. Friendly smiles were replaced with wary glances, and casual conversations in the elevator became awkward silences. It was clear that Victoria's words had had an effect. That evening, I broke down in tears as I told Jack what I'd overheard. He was angry and immediately confronted his mother, demanding she return the spare key she'd somehow obtained. Victoria's response was to play the victim, accusing me of turning her son against her. She began posting thinly veiled criticisms of me on social media, never mentioning me by name but making it clear who she was talking about. Then, one day, I was called into the principal's office at school. Mr. Thompson, my boss, looked uncomfortable as he slid an envelope across his desk to me. Melissa, we received this, complained about you, he said, his voice kind but concerned. Normally, we don't put much stock in anonymous letters, but given the nature of the accusations, I felt I should bring it to your attention. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and read the letter. It was a litany of false accusations, everything from theft to inappropriate behavior with students. My mind reeled. There was only one person who could be behind this, Victoria. Mr. Thompson assured me he didn't believe the accusations, but warned me that rumors had started circulating among some of the staff. As I left his office, I could feel the stares of my colleagues, hear the whispers behind my back. As the months passed, what should have been joyous family gatherings turned into nightmarish ordeals. Every holiday, every family dinner became an opportunity for Victoria to belittle and humiliate me in front of Jack's friends and relatives. The breaking point came at a party Victoria hosted at her home. I'd worn a simple white skirt, feeling pretty and confident for once. As the evening wore on, I noticed people giving me odd looks and snickering behind their hands. It wasn't until Jack arrived late and pulled me aside that I learned the horrifying truth. "Mel," he said, his face a mix of anger and embarrassment, "there's a huge red stain on the back of your skirt. It looks like ketchup." My cheeks burned with humiliation as I realized I'd been walking around all evening with this stain, completely unaware. But worse was to come. Victoria, it seemed, had been busy taking photos of me throughout the night, always angled to prominently display the stain. By the time we got home, these photos were all over social media, accompanied by Victoria's mocking comments. The next day at school was a nightmare. Some of my students had seen the photos, and I could hear their whispered jokes and giggles. It took all my strength not to break down in tears in front of my class. That evening, I told Jack I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm done with these family gatherings," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't keep subjecting myself to your mother's cruelty." To my relief, Jack agreed. "You're right, Mel. We'll stop attending. My mother's behavior is unacceptable." Amidst this turmoil, I discovered I was pregnant. For a brief, shining moment, I hoped this news might soften Victoria's heart. Perhaps the prospect of a grandchild would bring peace to our fractured family. I couldn't have been more wrong. Victoria's reaction to the news was chilling. "Are you sure it's Jack's?" she asked, her voice dripping with insinuation. "After all, you two haven't been around much lately. Who knows what you've been up to?" I was stunned by her accusation, but I soon realized it was more than just cruel words. I began to notice a car following me on my way to and from work. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but the same nondescript sedan kept appearing wherever I went. Shaken, I called the police. To my shock, when they tracked down and questioned the man, he admitted he was a private detective hired by Victoria to follow me. She had convinced herself that I was cheating on Jack and that the baby wasn't his. When Jack found out, he was livid. He confronted his mother in a heated phone call that I could hear from across the room. Victoria, caught red-handed, had no choice but to call off the detective. Months passed, and soon it was time for our baby to arrive. The delivery was long and difficult, but when I finally held our son in my arms, all the pain melted away. However, as I looked at him, I noticed something unexpected. Our beautiful baby boy had a much darker complexion than either Jack or me. He looked almost biracial. A seed of doubt planted itself in my mind. Would Jack think I'd been unfaithful? Before he could voice any suspicions, I insisted on a DNA test. The wait for the results was agonizing, but finally, we got the news: Jack was indeed our son's biological father. The doctor, seeing our confusion, suggested another possibility. "It's possible this trait comes from one of your parents. We could do DNA tests on them as well, to trace the genetic line." My parents, when approached with the idea, were calm and agreeable. They understood our confusion and were happy to help solve the mystery. But the thought of telling Victoria made my blood run cold. Given her past accusations and behavior, I feared how she might react to this news. Would she use this as ammunition in her ongoing campaign against me? As I cradled our beautiful, mysterious baby boy, I looked at Jack. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jack took my hand, his eyes full of love and determination. "We're going to love our son, no matter what. And we'll get to the bottom of this. Together." The day Victoria first saw her grandson should have been a joyous occasion. Instead, it turned into a nightmare. As soon as she laid eyes on our beautiful baby boy, her face contorted with shock and disgust. "What is this?" she shrieked, recoiling from the crib. "This child is too dark. He can't be Jack's." Before I could even respond, she rounded on me, her eyes blazing with fury. "You whore! You cheated on my son with some black guy from the alley, didn't you?" "Victoria, please," I begged, tears welling in my eyes. "We've done a DNA test. Jack is the father." I've never been unfaithful. But she was beyond reason. She stormed out of our apartment, and I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A few hours later, when I returned from a quick errand, I found all of my belongings strewn across the hallway outside our apartment. Clothes, books, even my underwear, all scattered on the floor for anyone to see. I stood there, shocked and humiliated, as neighbors peeked out of their doors to see what the commotion was about. Jack was livid when he came home and saw what his mother had done. He immediately called her, putting her on speakerphone so I could hear. "Mom, this has to stop," he shouted. "We've done a DNA test. I am the father. Melissa has never cheated on me." Victoria's voice was cold and dismissive. "DNA tests can be faked. I know what I see. We even had my parents take DNA tests, which confirmed their relationship to our son." But Victoria refused to listen to reason. When we suggested she and Jack's father take tests as well, she categorically refused. Victoria's obsession only grew worse over time. She began calling me from unknown numbers, leaving threatening voicemails. "Admit you cheated, or I'll destroy both your careers," she hissed in one particularly chilling message. She sent compromising letters to both Jack's workplace and my school. The stress became so overwhelming that I had to quit my job and find a position at another school across town. But even that wasn't enough. Victoria's campaign of harassment escalated. She planted threatening letters in our mailbox. She even went so far as to hire actors to harass me in public, taking photos of these staged encounters and sending them to Jack as proof of my infidelity. One night, as we lay in bed, both too stressed to sleep, I turned to Jack. "I'm worried about your mother," I whispered. "This behavior, it's not normal. I think she might need help." Jack nodded slowly. "I'd been thinking the same thing. But she'd never agree to see someone." The next day, I decided to reach out to Jack's father, Richard. We met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. Over coffee, I poured out everything that had been happening, the harassment, the threats, the elaborate schemes Victoria had concocted. Richard listened, his face growing more and more concerned. When I finished, he sat back with a heavy sigh. "I've noticed changes in her behavior," he admitted. "But I had no idea it had gotten this bad. You're right, she needs help. But she'd never agree to see a psychiatrist willingly." We spent the next hour brainstorming how we could get Victoria the help she clearly needed without her knowing. Richard's plan was simple, but effective. Under the guise of changing insurance providers, he convinced Victoria to undergo a comprehensive health checkup at a new clinic. To our surprise, she agreed without much fuss. The day of the examination arrived, and we all waited anxiously for the results. When they came, they were more shocking than any of us could have imagined. Victoria was diagnosed with a complex mental illness, one that was genetically transmitted through the female line in her family. The doctor explained that without early intervention, the women in her family tended to experience severe mental health deterioration as they aged. Victoria's erratic behavior and obsessive actions were symptoms of this progressive condition. The news hit us all hard, but it also brought a sense of relief. There was a reason for Victoria's actions, a medical explanation for the torment she had put us through. With the diagnosis came a treatment plan, and Victoria was admitted to a specialized clinic for care. But the revelations didn't stop there. Richard, in an attempt to understand the genetic components of Victoria's condition, decided to undergo genetic testing himself. The results shook our family to its core. Richard was not Jack's biological father. When Richard shared this news with us, the pieces suddenly fell into place. It wasn't me who had been unfaithful, it was Victoria, years ago, with a man of African descent. The very thing she had accused me of, she had done herself. I expected anger or resentment from Richard, but his reaction surprised me. He looked at Jack with tears in his eyes and said, "Son, I may not be your biological father, but I raised you. I loved you from the moment you were born, and nothing will ever change that. You are my son in every way that matters." Jack hugged his father tightly, affirming that Richard was and always would be his dad. As for his biological father, Jack decided he had no interest in searching for him. "The man who raised me, who stood by me through everything, that's my real father," he declared. With Victoria receiving the care she needed and the truth finally out in the open, a sense of peace settled over our family. Richard, free from Victoria's influence, became a doting grandfather to our son. He would spend hours playing with him, marveling at his curly black hair and striking blue eyes. One evening, as we sat in the living room of Richard's spacious house, he made an unexpected proposal. "Why don't you all move in here?" he suggested. "This place is too big for just me, and I'd love to have my family close." Jack and I exchanged glances, then smiled. It felt right, like the beginning of a new chapter for all of us. We agreed, and within a few weeks, we had moved into Richard's home. Life settled into a new, happier rhythm. Our son grew into a handsome, swarthy boy, his mixed heritage evident in his features. But to us, and to everyone who knew our family's story, his appearance was simply a part of who he was, a beautiful, loved child. Victoria remained in the clinic, receiving the care she needed. While we didn't visit often, we made sure she was comfortable and well treated. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was one we could live with. My name's Amelia, and I've got a story to tell you. I grew up in what you'd call an ordinary family: mom, dad, and a little sister named Lily. Sounds nice, right? Well, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Lily was difficult, to put it mildly. She was the kind of kid who'd scream bloody murder if she didn't get her way. And boy, did she know how to work our parents. They'd bend over backwards just to keep her from throwing one of her famous tantrums. "Amelia, honey," my mom would say, her voice strained, "could you please let Lily have the last cookie? You know how she gets." And I'd nod, because what else could I do? I was the good girl, the one who didn't make waves. I learned early on that it was easier to fade into the background than to compete with Hurricane Lily. As we grew older, the pattern stayed the same. Lily demanded, our parents caved, and I just tried to stay out of the way. I buried myself in books and schoolwork, dreaming of the day I could leave it all behind. That day finally came when I got accepted to college on a full-ride scholarship. As I packed my bags, I felt a mix of excitement and guilt. Excitement for the new life waiting for me, and guilt for leaving my parents to deal with Lily alone. But I pushed that guilt down deep. It was time for me to live my own life. The next morning, as I loaded my beat-up old car with everything I owned, my mom hugged me tight. "We're so proud of you, Amelia," she whispered. "You're going to do great things." Dad clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Remember, you can always come home if you need to." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Lily watched from the porch, arms crossed, not saying a word. College was like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to tiptoe around anyone's feelings or give up what I wanted. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make the most of this opportunity. Meanwhile, life back home continued as usual. Lily, predictably, didn't move out. Instead, she married her high school sweetheart, Tom, right after graduation. And where did they decide to live? With our parents, of course. I'd get calls from Mom every now and then, her voice tired but trying to sound upbeat. "Lily and Tom are still settling in," she'd say. "It's nice having the grandkids around." But I could read between the lines. Lily was using our parents as free childcare and housekeeping. She'd pop out 2 kids in quick succession, all while never holding down a job. Tom worked, sure, but from what I gathered, he wasn't exactly bringing home the big bucks. One day, during a rare visit home, I overheard Lily talking to Mom in the kitchen. "Mom, can you watch the kids tonight? Tom and I want to go out." "Lily, honey, your father and I had plans." "Oh, come on. It's not like you have anything important to do. We never get a night off." I peeked around the corner to see Mom's shoulders slump in defeat. "All right, dear. We'll watch them." It made my blood boil, but what could I say? I was the one who'd left, after all. So I bit my tongue and focused on my own life. After graduation, I landed a job at an international company as a manager. It wasn't easy. I worked long hours, took on extra projects, did whatever it took to get ahead. But it paid off. Within a few years, I was head of my department. While Lily was demanding our parents buy her groceries, I was saving every penny I could. It wasn't glamorous, no fancy clothes or wild nights out for me. But slowly, surely, I built up my savings. First came the apartment. Nothing fancy, just a small one-bedroom, but it was mine. I remember the day I got the keys, standing in the empty living room, hardly able to believe it was real. Then the car. Again, nothing flashy, but reliable and paid for in full. All the while, I kept my head down and worked hard. I didn't have much of a social life, but that was okay. I was building something for myself, something no one could take away. Dating? It wasn't really on my radar. I went out occasionally, but nothing serious. That is, until I met Jake. Jake was different from the start. He didn't try to impress me with fancy restaurants or smooth talk. Instead, he challenged me, made me laugh, and most importantly, he respected my drive. "You're something else, Amelia," he said on our third date, shaking his head in admiration. "Most people would be burned out, working as hard as you do. But you're thriving." I shrugged, a little uncomfortable with the praise. "I just know what I want, that's all." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Well, I know what I want too. And it's you, Amelia." For the first time in years, I felt my carefully constructed walls start to crumble. Maybe, just maybe, there was room in my life for more than just work and saving money. Jake and I dated for a few years before he finally popped the question. I'll be honest, I was hesitant at first. Marriage wasn't something I'd given much thought to, always focused on my career and financial stability. But Jake, he had a way of making me see beyond my self-imposed limitations. The day of the wedding arrived, and despite my reservations, I was excited. This was my day, after all. I was marrying the man I loved. Then Lily showed up. My sister waltzed into the bridal suite wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously bridal. "Oh, Amelia," she exclaimed, twirling around. "Don't you love my dress? I wanted to look my best for your big day." I stared at her, speechless. Was she seriously trying to upstage me at my own wedding? "Lily," I finally managed, "don't you think that dress is a bit inappropriate for a bridesmaid?" She pouted, looking around at our cousins who were helping me get ready. "What do you mean? I think I look great." "Don't I look great, girls?" Our cousins, not wanting to cause a scene, mumbled awkward agreements. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this was my day. I wasn't going to let Lily's antics ruin it. "It's fine," I said, turning back to the mirror. "Let's just get this show on the road." The ceremony itself was beautiful. Jake's eyes lit up when he saw me walking down the aisle, and in that moment, all the stress and family drama faded away. This was about us, about our love and our future together. But at the reception, things got interesting. More than once, I overheard guests asking Lily if she was the bride. She'd giggle and say, "Oh no, that's my sister. But doesn't this dress look amazing on me?" Jake, bless him, did his best to keep me calm. "Don't let it get to you," he whispered, squeezing my hand. "Everyone knows you're the star of this show." And he was right. Despite Lily's best efforts, the day was still ours. We danced, we laughed, we celebrated with our friends and family. And at the end of the night, as Jake and I drove off to start our honeymoon, I felt a sense of peace. After the wedding, Jake and I settled into a rhythm. We moved into his apartment, which was bigger and in a nicer area than mine. I decided to keep my old place and rent it out, just another investment for the future, I thought. I threw myself back into work with renewed energy. Jake was supportive, always there with a cup of coffee when I was burning the midnight oil or a shoulder to lean on when deals fell through. But it wasn't just about work anymore. I started looking into investments, particularly securities. It was a whole new world, full of risks and potential rewards. And payoff it did. 5 years flew by, and suddenly we found ourselves sitting on a decent nest egg. That's when I had an idea. Let's buy a vacation home, I suggested to Jake one evening. Somewhere my parents could use too, to get away from everything. Jake knew what I meant by everything. My sister, her husband, their 3 kids, it was a lot for my parents to handle. We found the perfect place, a beautiful villa on a lake, just outside the city. It had everything, a large barbecue area, a sprawling terrace, 3 bedrooms, and a view that took your breath away. The moment I saw it, I knew it was the one. The day we closed the deal, I called my parents. "Mom, Dad, I've got a surprise for you," I said, barely containing my excitement. When they arrived at the villa, my mom's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Amelia," she whispered, looking around in awe. This is too much." Dad was speechless, running his hand along the smooth kitchen countertop like he couldn't believe it was real. "It's not too much," I insisted. "You deserve this. A place to relax, to get away from." "From your sister," Dad finished, a hint of guilt in his voice. I nodded. "But listen, there's one thing. Can we not tell Lily that I bought this? Can we say it's yours? That you bought it with your savings?" Mom looked confused. "But why?" I sighed, thinking about the phone call I'd had with Lily just the day before. She'd asked to borrow money for a car, and I'd said no. I could only imagine how she'd react if she found out about this place. "It's just easier this way," I said. "Please?" They agreed, albeit reluctantly. Little did I know the storm this white lie would stir up. A few days later, I got a call from Mom. She sounded exhausted. "Lily found out about the villa," she said. She wants us to sell it. Says we should give her the money instead, so she can buy a sports car and travel the world." I could feel my blood pressure rising. "And what did you say?" "We said no, of course. But Amelia, it was bad. She screamed, she cried. Said we loved you more, that we always favored you." I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar mixture of guilt and frustration. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I never meant to cause trouble." "It's not your fault, sweetie," Mom said, but I could hear the weariness in her voice. "Your father and we've decided to move to the villa. Full-time. We just can't. We can't do this anymore." As I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. My parents were finally standing up for themselves, finally taking a step back from Lily's chaos. But at the same time, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. I knew this wasn't the end of it. Lily wouldn't let this go without a fight. It was a sunny Saturday when Jake and I decided to surprise my parents with a visit to the villa. But as we got closer, something felt off. The sound of loud music filled the air, and I could see cars parked haphazardly on the lawn. We pulled up to the villa, and the scene that greeted us was chaos. People were everywhere, drinking, laughing, kids running around screaming. And right in the middle of it all was Lily, holding court like she owned the place. When she saw us, her eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here?" I looked around, trying to spot my parents. "Where's Mom and Dad?" Lily waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Mom's out walking with the kids. Dad's gone to get more meat for the barbecue." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You sent them out? While you're having a party?" "It's a celebration," Lily exclaimed. "We're christening the new family vacation home." "Not that you'd understand, Miss Workaholic." I felt my blood begin to boil. "Lily, this isn't..." She cut me off. "Look, Amelia, why don't you and Jake just leave? Your sour face is going to ruin everyone's mood." I stood there, speechless. Jake put his hand on my arm. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's go." As we drove away, I couldn't shake the image of Lily lording over my villa, the villa I'd bought for our parents. I can't believe her, I fumed. Using mom and dad like that, treating the place like it's hers. Jake sighed. Maybe it's just a one-time thing? But it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, I heard from mom about the constant stream of parties and get-togethers Lily was hosting at the villa. And when she wasn't partying, she was dumping her kids on our parents. The kids are missing school, mom confided in me during one of our calls. She sounded exhausted. Lily says it's not a big deal for Tommy, he's only 4. But Emily and Jack are falling behind. By the way, I forgot to mention that Lily gave birth to her 3rd child shortly after my wedding. I'd had enough. The next time I saw Lily, I confronted her. You need to stop taking advantage of mom and dad, I said. They're not your personal babysitters. And the kids need to be in school. Lily rolled her eyes. Don't be such a killjoy, Amelia. Mom and dad love having the kids around. But I could see the toll it was taking on our parents. They looked tired, worn down. This wasn't the peaceful retirement I'd envisioned for them when I bought the villa. After several more failed attempts to reason with Lily, I made a difficult decision. I contacted Child Protective Services. The investigation was quick and discreet. Lily got a formal reprimand, and suddenly, the kids were back in school full-time. The endless parties at the villa stopped too. Mom called me a few days later. Things have calmed down, she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. Your father and I are actually getting to enjoy the place now. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was what I'd wanted all along, for my parents to have a peaceful place to retire. But my relief was short-lived. The next time I saw Lily, her eyes were full of venom. I know what you did, she spat. Calling CPS on your own sister. You're a traitor, Amelia. I'll never forgive you for this. A few months passed quickly. It was my mom's birthday, and Jake and I decided to surprise her with a weekend visit to the villa. We had visions of a quiet family celebration, maybe a nice dinner on the terrace overlooking the lake. But as we pulled up to the house, those dreams quickly evaporated. The place was in chaos. Music blared from speakers, people were everywhere, and kids were running wild across the lawn. It looked like Lily had invited half the town. We made our way inside, where I found Mom in the kitchen, looking exhausted and on the verge of tears. Happy birthday, Mom, I said, giving her a hug. She clung to me a little too tightly. Oh, Amelia, she whispered. I just wanted a quiet day with family. But Lily, she invited all these people. Your father and I have been running around all day, serving drinks, cooking food. I stepped out onto the lawn, searching for Lily in the crowd. When I spotted her, laughing with a group of friends, I marched over. Lily, we need to talk, I said firmly. This is Mom's birthday. She wanted a family day, not this. I gestured at the chaos around us. Lily laughed loudly. Oh, lighten up. Mom loves having people over. Stop being such a buzzkill. Frustrated, I walked over to a group of guests near the speakers. Excuse me, I said, raising my voice to be heard over the music. Could you please turn this down? It's too loud. The guests, clearly drunk, just laughed and turned the volume up higher. As I stood there, trying to figure out what to do next, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Lily was huddled with a group of kids, pointing in my direction and giggling. With horror, I realized she was handing them ice cream cones and encouraging them to throw them at me. Before I could react, the first scoop of ice cream flew past my head. I ducked, and it hit a woman behind me square in the face. Chaos erupted. More ice cream was flying, kids were screaming, and adults were yelling. Lily's voice rose above the commotion. Look what you've done, Amelia. You're ruining everything, as usual. The crowd, fueled by alcohol and Lily's accusations, started to turn ugly. Men and women were shouting, moving towards Jake and me with clenched fists. I felt Jake's hand on my arm. Amelia, we need to get out of here, he said urgently. But I'd had enough. This was my parents' home, the home I'd bought for them. This had to stop. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "I'm calling the police," I announced loudly. The police arrived quickly, lights flashing. As it turned out, they'd already received noise complaints from the neighbors. "Who owns this property?" one of the officers asked. I stepped forward. "I do. I'm Amelia Johnson. My parents live here, but these people," I gestured to the crowd, "are here without my invitation." The officers nodded and quickly got to work, ushering the drunk guests off the property and warning them about the consequences of starting a fight. As the police cars drove away with the last of the uninvited guests, an eerie silence fell over the villa. The aftermath of the chaotic party was strewn all around: empty bottles, discarded plates, and the lingering tension in the air. Lily stood in the middle of the living room, her face a mix of shock and anger. "What do you mean, this is your house?" she demanded, her voice shrill. I took a deep breath. "I bought it. For Mom and Dad to retire in peace." "You?" Lily's eyes narrowed. Then, suddenly, her demeanor changed. A sly smile spread across her face. Well, Little Miss Perfect. Always full of surprises." She sauntered over to me, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Listen, Amelia. Let's forget about this little misunderstanding. I've got a proposition for you." I raised an eyebrow, wary. "What are you talking about?" "This property," Lily gestured around grandly. "It's got potential. Why don't you sign it over to me? I could build a few more houses, rent them out. I've been looking for a passive income opportunity for ages. You've already got your fancy job. Why not help your sister out?" "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "This house is for Mom and Dad. It's not for sale or development." Lily's face darkened. "You'll regret this, Amelia. Mark my words." With that, she stormed out, her husband and kids trailing behind her. I turned to Mom, who looked shell-shocked. "I'm so sorry, Mom. This isn't how your birthday was supposed to go." To my surprise, she pulled me into a hug. "Oh, honey. Thank you for standing up for us. For everything." I spent the rest of the day helping Mom clean up the mess, but Lily's threat kept echoing in my mind. I knew my sister well enough to know she wouldn't let this go easily. Before Jake and I left, I made a decision. I hired a security company to install hidden cameras around the property and set up an alarm system that would alert my phone if anyone entered the grounds. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with an alert from the villa's security system. Someone had entered the property. Worried it might be a false alarm triggered by my parents, I called Mom. "Mom, are you and Dad at the villa?" There was a pause. "No, honey. We're back at the old house. Lily," she insisted we come help with the kids. "We've been here for a week." My heart sank. I told Mom I'd call her back and immediately headed for the villa with Jake. The sight that greeted us was heartbreaking. The beautiful home I'd bought for my parents was in shambles. Furniture was overturned, things were strewn everywhere, and there was even some graffiti on the walls. Fury rose in me as I called the police. When they arrived, I showed them the security footage. There was no doubt, it was Lily and her husband, vandalizing the property in a drunken rage. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Lily. "You need to drop the charges," she said without preamble. "The police brought us in for questioning. They're talking about pressing charges for vandalism and trespassing. You have to make this go away, Amelia." I took a deep breath. "No, Lily. I'm done cleaning up your messes. I'm done being the family peacekeeper at the expense of my own peace. From now on, you can talk to my lawyer." The weeks following the villa incident were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and family drama. I was determined to see this through, to finally put an end to Lily's destructive behavior. I had the villa professionally cleaned and repaired, carefully documenting every bit of damage. The bill came to just over $10,000. My lawyer advised me to sue for the full amount, and after some soul-searching, I agreed. The day of the court hearing arrived. I sat on one side of the courtroom, Lily and her husband on the other. She wouldn't even look at me. The judge listened to both sides, reviewed the evidence, including the security camera footage. In the end, his decision was clear. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, he announced. The defendants are ordered to pay $10,000 in damages. But that wasn't all. Due to the nature of the crime and the clear evidence, the judge also handed down a suspended sentence for trespassing and property damage. The aftermath of the trial hit Lily and her family hard. Her husband, who'd always coasted by on charm and family connections, suddenly found himself struggling to find work. No one wanted to hire someone with a criminal record, even if it was suspended. Lily, who'd never worked a day in her life, was forced to find a job. I heard through the grapevine that she was waiting tables at a local diner, coming home exhausted every night. As for me, I made the difficult decision to cut ties completely. I issued a legal notice barring Lily from the villa and ceased all communication with her. It was painful, but necessary. Mom and Dad, finally free from Lily's constant demands, moved into the villa full-time. The change in them was remarkable. They looked years younger, more relaxed than I'd seen them in decades. "We should have done this years ago," Dad told me during one of my monthly visits. "We love having the grandkids over, but now it's on our terms. A few hours at a time, and then back to our peaceful life." They'd left their old house to Lily, a final act of parental kindness, but made it clear that the financial support stopped there. It was time for Lily to stand on her own 2 feet. As for me, life was looking up. Work was going well, my relationship with Jake was stronger than ever, and then we got some unexpected news. "I'm pregnant," I told Jake one evening, my voice shaking with excitement and nervousness. His face lit up like a Christmas tree. He picked me up and spun me around, both of us laughing and crying at the same time. As I write this, I'm 6 months along. We're having a little girl. Jake and I are busy preparing the nursery, reading every parenting book we can get our hands on. I still think about Lily sometimes. Last I heard, she and her husband were fighting constantly, teetering on the edge of divorce. Part of me feels sad for her, for the mess she's made of her life. But a bigger part of me feels free. Free from the obligation to always fix her problems, to be the peacekeeper at the expense of my own happiness. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am. My name's Charlotte, and I was born into what you'd call an ordinary family. But when I was 2, everything changed. My dad died, leaving my mom a widow with a toddler. Mom didn't stay single for long. She married this guy, a big-shot entrepreneur with his own construction company. From the get-go, it was clear Mom was head over heels for Steve. She'd do anything for the guy, I swear. It was like I didn't even exist anymore. Things got even worse when Mom popped out another kid. A girl named Rachel. Suddenly, I had a half-sister who could do no wrong in Mom's eyes. She doted on that kid like she was made of gold, always trying to show Steve what a great mom she was to his precious daughter. Steve, he was this big, scary-looking dude. Always had this stern look on his face, like he was perpetually pissed off. But man, you should have seen how he melted around his own kid. All smiles and affection. Me? I might as well have been invisible. "Charlotte," he'd bark, "you're the oldest. Act like it. Help out around here." And help out I did. From the time I could reach the kitchen counter, I was cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, you name it. Rachel? She never lifted a finger. Didn't even clean up after herself or wash a single dish. Meanwhile, my grades were slipping. How could they not? Between all the chores and taking care of the house, I barely had time to crack open a book. Mom noticed, of course. But instead of understanding, all I got was grief. "What's wrong with you, Charlotte?" she'd yell. "Are you stupid or just lazy? Your sister manages to get good grades. Why can't you?" I wanted to scream, to tell her why. But I knew it wouldn't make a difference. In this house, I was the maid, the cook, the cleaner. And apparently, I was supposed to be a straight-A student too. As the years went by, things only got worse. Steve's business grew, and suddenly all of Mom's relatives were working for him. Even Mom got a job at the company. And guess who got stuck with all the housework? Yep, yours truly. By the time I graduated high school, I was exhausted. My grades were mediocre at best, nowhere near good enough for a scholarship. And boy, did I hear about it. "You're so stupid," Mom screamed, her face red with anger. "How could you mess this up?" Steve, ever the pragmatist, just shook his head. "I'm not paying for your college if you can't even be bothered to try," he said coldly. And just like that, my dreams of going to college went up in smoke. Instead, I found myself working at Steve's company, doing the kind of low-paid, back-breaking work that nobody else wanted. You know, I had dreams once. Big dreams of becoming a hairstylist. I'd spend hours watching tutorials online, practicing on old dolls I'd fish out of the trash. I saved every penny I could, scraping together loose change and the measly tips I'd get from the guys at the construction site. Finally, after months of saving, I bought myself a clipper. One night, I couldn't contain my excitement anymore. My sister was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone, looking bored as usual. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Want to see something cool?" She barely glanced up. "What?" I pulled out the clipper, my hands shaking a little. "I got this. I'm gonna be a hairstylist someday." For a moment, she actually looked interested. "Really? Let me see that." I handed it over, feeling a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she'd understand. She turned it over in her hands, then tossed it back to me with a smirk. "Good luck with that. Mom and Dad will never let you." I should have known better than to trust her. A few days later, all hell broke loose. Steve stormed into the living room in a rage, his face purple with anger. "Who did this?" he bellowed. "Who mutilated Fluffy?" I came out of the kitchen, wiping my hands on a dishcloth. The sight that appeared before me was terrible. There, on the floor, was his prize dog. The poor thing looked like it had been attacked by a lawnmower, chunks of fur missing, cuts all over its body. That's when my sister piped up, her eyes wide with fake innocence. "Oh, Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "I think I know what happened." All eyes turned to her as she spun her tale. "Charlotte's been talking about being a hairstylist. She even bought clippers. I think she might have practiced on Fluffy." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What? No, I'd never." But Steve wasn't listening. He stormed into my room, tearing it apart until he found the clippers. And there, stuck in the blades, were tufts of dog hair. I felt like I was going to be sick. "I didn't do it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I swear, I didn't touch Fluffy." My sister burst into tears, putting on a show worthy of an Oscar. "Please don't be too hard on her, Dad. She probably didn't mean to hurt Fluffy." Steve's face was stone cold as he turned to me. "Get out," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Pack your things and get out of my house, now." Mom just stood there, not saying a word. Not even looking at me. As I packed my meager belongings, I could hear my sister's fake sobs from the living room. The little shit had set me up, and she'd done it perfectly. With nowhere else to go, I headed to my grandmother's place in the next town over. She was my dad's mom, the only one who'd ever shown me any real kindness. I told her everything, my words tumbling out between sobs. She listened, her face growing darker with each word. "You can stay here as long as you need," she said, pulling me into a hug. "We'll figure this out together." And just like that, I started my new life. Got a job at a local diner, worked my ass off. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. 3 years later, Grandma passed away. It hit me hard, she was the only real family I had left. But even in death, she was looking out for me. She left me her house and a little nest egg she'd been saving. With Grandma's savings and every penny I'd squirreled away from the diner, I opened my own beauty salon. It wasn't much at first, just me, a chair, and a mirror. But it was mine. All mine. The first few weeks were tough. I'd sit there, staring at the door, willing it to open. But slowly, word got around. One customer became 2, then 10, then I couldn't keep up. I had to hire my first employee. Then another. Before I knew it, I had a full staff and 3 chairs running nonstop. The salon was always full of chatter and laughter. For once in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Like I was good at something. "Charlotte, you're a miracle worker," one of my regulars exclaimed after I fixed a botched dye job she'd tried at home. I grinned, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "Just doing my job, Mrs. Johnson." But it wasn't just my hairstyling skills that were changing. I was changing too. Gone was the meek, scared girl who'd let everyone walk all over her. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who didn't take shit from anyone. One day, a customer was giving one of my new girls a hard time. I stepped in, my voice firm. "Ma'am, if you can't treat my staff with respect, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The woman spluttered. "But I'm the customer. The customer is always right." I crossed my arms, standing my ground. "Not in my salon, they're not. There's the door." Life was good. Really good. But you know how they say curiosity killed the cat? Well, one night, after a long day at the salon, I made the mistake of checking social media. There she was, my sister. All smiles in front of some fancy college, caption boasting about her business and management program. And the comments? Full of praise from Mom, Steve, and all the relatives who'd turned their backs on me. So proud of our little genius. Following in her father's footsteps. Can't wait to see you take over the company. I scrolled further. Vacation pics from all over the world. A shiny new car, graduation gift from the best parents ever. My stomach churned. Just as I was about to close the app, a new post popped up. Mom and Steve, all decked out in Hawaiian shirts and leis. Celebrating our brilliant daughter taking over the company. Time for a well-deserved break. Part of me wanted to be angry. To scream and rage at the unfairness of it all. But as I looked around my salon, at the life I'd built for myself, I realized something. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their love or their support. I had made it on my own, against all odds. Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. One lazy Sunday afternoon, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Sarah, the only member of my family I still kept in touch with. "Charlotte, you're not gonna believe this," she said, barely containing her laughter. "Your sister? Turns out she's not so perfect after all." Over the next few minutes, Aunt Sarah filled me in on the family gossip. Apparently, while Steve and Mom were sipping Mai Tais in Hawaii, my sister had been running the company, right into the ground. "Made some real boneheaded moves," Aunt Sarah said. "Steve came back early, mad as a hornet. Told her he'd wasted his money on her fancy education." We chatted a bit more before hanging up. I went about my day, pushing thoughts of my family to the back of my mind. But life wasn't done with its surprises. A few weeks later, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I approached cautiously. When I opened it, I nearly fell over in shock. There stood my sister, mascara running down her face, a suitcase at her feet. "Charlotte," she sobbed, throwing herself at me. "Dad kicked me out. He disowned me, took away my apartment. I'm homeless." For a moment, I felt a pang of pity. Then I remembered all the years of torment, all the manipulation. I gently, but firmly, pushed her away. "What do you want, Rachel?" I asked, my voice flat. She looked up at me, eyes wide and pleading. "Can I stay with you? Please? I need help, a job. I could be the director of your salon. I almost laughed out loud. Director? You've got to be kidding me. But I have a business degree, she wailed. I'm qualified. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Look, I need a secretary. Someone to work the front desk, book appointments. That's all I can offer. Rachel's face changed in an instant. The tears dried up, replaced by a look of indignation. A secretary? You're supposed to help me. Give me a real job, let me live with you. I'd had enough. Years of pent-up anger and resentment came bubbling to the surface. No, I said, my voice cold and firm. I don't owe you anything. There's a cheap hostel down the street. Good luck. Rachel stared at me, mouth agape. Clearly, she hadn't expected this. Without another word, I closed the door in her face. Through the window, I watched as she stomped down the driveway, her theatrical sobs replaced by a scowl of pure rage. She threw her suitcase into the back of a shiny car, the same one I'd seen in her social media posts. A few days after Rachel's dramatic exit, I got a call from an old friend who still had connections to my family. The conversation also turned to Rachel. Charlotte, your sister wasn't kicked out at all, she said. She's throwing a tantrum because your dad scolded her for messing up at work. I gripped the phone tighter. You're kidding me. Nope, she thought she'd teach him a lesson by running away. Figured she'd crash at your place, mooch some money, then go back home when she's made her point. After hanging up, I felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger at Rachel's audacity, but relief that I'd seen through her act. The old me would have fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. Just when I thought things had settled, my phone rang again. This time, it was Mom. Charlotte, she said, her voice cold and disapproving. How could you turn your sister away like that? You should give her a job as a manager, not some lowly secretary position. I nearly choked. Manager? Are you serious? Of course I am, Mom snapped. She has an expensive education. She's taken management courses. She's much smarter than you, Charlotte. That was it. The last straw. Years of pent-up resentment came pouring out. If she's so smart, I spat, then why did she screw up Dad's company so badly? There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Mom spoke again, her voice was icy. Your sister just needs to learn. The director position at your salon would be perfect for her to practice. It's not like your little haircutting business would be a great loss if she makes a few mistakes. I saw red. My little haircutting business? Do you have any idea what I built here? No, of course you don't. You never cared about what I did. Charlotte. But I was on a roll. No, you listen to me for once. Do you know what it was like growing up in that house? Being treated like a servant? Being kicked out with nowhere to go? Do you even care? I ranted for what felt like hours, letting out every hurt, every slight, every moment of neglect I'd suffered. Mom stayed silent throughout. When I finally ran out of steam, I felt drained but somehow lighter. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd understood. Then she spoke. Are you quite finished? Now, as I was saying, it's your duty to help your sister. You will give her the director position. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like she hadn't heard a word I'd said. In that moment, I realized something, nothing was ever going to change. No, I said, my voice steady and cold. I won't be hiring Rachel for any position. And don't call me again unless you're ready to apologize for how you've treated me all these years. I hung up and blocked her number, my hands shaking. Part of me wanted to cry, to mourn the mother I'd never really had. But another part, a stronger part, felt free. Just when I thought the dust had settled, all hell broke loose. My phone started blowing up with notifications. At first, I ignored them, thinking it was just the usual social media noise. But then I saw a message from Aunt Sarah. Charlotte, honey, you might want to check the family group chat. It's not pretty. With a sense of dread, I opened the app. What I saw made my stomach churn. Uncle Bob had posted, "Can't believe how stuck up Charlotte's gotten. Opens one little salon and thinks she's too good for family." Cousin Emma chimed in, "So selfish. Won't even help her own sister. Disgraceful." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Tears stung my eyes as I scrolled through message after message of hate and judgment. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I was done being the family punching bag. It was time to fight back. I called up a lawyer friend of mine, Jake, and asked him to meet me for coffee. He listened intently as I showed him the messages, his frown deepening with each swipe. "This is straight up harassment, Charlotte," he said, shaking his head. "We can definitely work with this." He explained my options, but one stood out: we could draft up a cease and desist letter. Threaten legal action if they don't stop. It might scare them enough to back off. Jake got to work right away. A few days later, I had a stack of official-looking letters in my hand, one for each family member who'd participated in the online assault. With a deep breath, I started sending them out. To each relative, I attached a personal note. "I've seen your posts. This is your one and only warning. Continue to harass me, and I'll see you in court. Choose wisely." The response was almost immediate. My phone started ringing off the hook. I let it go to voicemail, listening to the messages later with a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Uncle Bob sounded panicked. "Charlotte, sweetie, it was just a joke. No need to get lawyers involved." Cousin Emma was in tears. "Please don't sue us. We didn't mean anything by it." One by one, the offensive posts disappeared. The family chat went silent. It was like someone had flipped a switch. Aunt Sarah called me that evening. "Damn, girl," she chuckled. "You sure know how to clear a room." I laughed, but it was hollow. I didn't want it to come to this, Aunt Sarah. But I couldn't let them keep treating me like that. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, staring at the wall. I'd always dreamed of having a big, loving family. Now, it felt like I'd burned the last bridge connecting me to that dream. But as I looked around at the life I'd built for myself, my thriving salon, my comfortable home, my true friends, I realized something. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes, it's about the people who stand by you, who support you no matter what. I might have lost the family I was born into, but I'd gained something far more valuable: self-respect. My birthday. For once, I was actually looking forward to it. No family drama, just a nice evening with my friends and salon staff. People who actually cared about me. I was putting the finishing touches on my makeup when my phone rang. It was Jess, my head stylist. "Charlotte, you need to get down here. It's your sister. She's here, and she's... God, Charlotte, it's bad. Just hurry." I broke every speed limit getting to the salon. The place looked like a war zone. Shattered mirrors, overturned styling chairs, hair products splattered everywhere. And in the middle of it all, being restrained by 2 cops, was Rachel. "You bastard," she screamed when she saw me. "This is all your fault." I ignored her, turning to Jess. "What the hell happened?" Jess looked shell-shocked. She just burst in, drunk off her ass. Started throwing things, screaming about how you ruined her life. We tried to stop her, but... I surveyed the damage, my heart sinking. This would cost thousands to fix. One of the officers approached me. "Ma'am, we're taking her down to the station. Will you be pressing charges?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. "Mom." Because of course it was. "Don't you dare press charges, Charlotte," she hissed without so much as a hello. "Tell them it was a birthday prank gone wrong." I couldn't help it. I laughed. A hollow, bitter laugh that made everyone around me take a step back. "A birthday prank? That's rich, Mom. You know, it's funny. You didn't remember my birthday until you needed an excuse for Rachel's behavior." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Look, I continued, my voice tight with anger, your precious Rachel just destroyed my business. She's going to jail, and I'm going to make damn sure she pays for every cent of damage. I hung up and turned to the officer. I want to press charges. All of them. I followed the police to the station, my mind reeling. This was supposed to be a happy day, a celebration. Instead, I was filing a police report against my own sister. As I sat in the cold, sterile interview room, giving my statement to a bored-looking detective, I couldn't help but think about how we'd gotten here. How had things gone so wrong? When I finally got home, hours later, I found my friends and staff waiting for me. They'd cleaned up the salon as best they could and brought the party to my place. As I looked around at these people, my chosen family, I felt a lump in my throat. Thanks, guys, I managed to choke out. This means a lot. We raised our glasses in a toast. To Charlotte, Jess said. The toughest boss and best friend we could ask for. The court case dragged on for months. Every day was a new battle, a new low in family drama. But I stood my ground. Finally, the verdict came in. Rachel got a suspended sentence for hooliganism and had to pay me a hefty sum in compensation. I thought I'd feel victorious. Instead, I just felt tired. The day after the sentencing, I got a call from Steve. You happy now? He growled. You've torn this family apart. As far as I'm concerned, you're dead to us. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, waiting for the pain to hit. But all I felt was relief. Mom didn't even bother to call. She sent a text, I hope you're satisfied with what you've done. Don't contact us again. I showed the messages to Aunt Sarah over coffee the next day. She shook her head, disgusted. You're better off without them, honey, she said, squeezing my hand. You've got me. And you've got yourself. That's all you need. She was right. I threw myself into my work, channeling all my energy into expanding my business. One salon became 2, then 3. Before I knew it, I was running a small empire of beauty salons across the city. Years passed. I was happier than I'd ever been, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. My family became a distant memory, a bad dream I'd finally woken up from. Then, one lazy Sunday morning, I was scrolling through social media when a headline caught my eye. Local construction mogul bankrupt, daughter's financial scams to blame. My heart skipped a beat. There was Rachel's face, being led away in handcuffs. The article detailed how she'd embezzled millions from Steve's company, running various financial scams that had finally caught up with her. The fallout was swift and merciless. Steve's company collapsed, taking down all the family members who worked there with it. And suddenly, my phone was blowing up with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Uncle Bob. Charlotte, sweetie, I know we've had our differences, but I'm in a tough spot. Any chance of a job at one of your salons? Cousin Emma. Hey cuz. Long time no speak. So, I heard you're doing well. One by one, they came crawling out of the woodwork, all with the same plea, give me a job, lend me money, save me from the mess Rachel made. My finger hovered over the reply button. Then, with a deep breath, I hit block instead. One by one, I shut them out of my life for good. The only message I responded to was from Aunt Sarah. You okay, honey? I saw the news. I wrote back. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I'm free. That night, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse apartment, overlooking the city where my salons now thrived. I thought about the long, hard road that had brought me here. The pain, the struggles, the moments of doubt. But I also thought about the strength I'd found, the true friends I'd made, the success I'd built with my own 2 hands.